Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order here. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to ask Ann to call the roll for us, please.
Mike Alley,
Present.
Dr. Berger,
Present.
Dennis Bland,
Present.
Mike Daigle,
Present.
Judge Fisher,
Here.
Bill Hanna,
Here.
Al Hubbard,
Here.
Nancy Jordan,
Here.
Chris Lameau,
Present.
Pepper Mulheron,
Present.
Dan Peterson,
Here.
Tom Saunders, Erica Studerman.
Thanks, Ann. Well, again, good morning, everyone. I want to thank the University of Southern Indiana's president, Dr. Ronald Vachon, and the USI team for being gracious hosts yesterday and for hosting our meeting today. President Vachon, I haven't been here since 2018. Your camp's beautiful. We had 3 stops yesterday for several of us on the staff and commission members, and beautiful facility where we started is it Stone Family Center?
Stone. Yes, sir.
Yes, and have heard a lot about it and just love the interdisciplinary things going on there. And of course, UV and IU are in there too. And that's a neat thing to see in the state, of course. For this body, I think we've talked about this types of partnerships for a long time. And then the other facilities here on campus, just beautiful. So thank you so much, and thanks to Aaron and Elizabeth, shepherded us around last night. And that was wonderful too, and your hospitality has been great. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to just say good morning to commissioners, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you as well, sir. And Mr. Commissioner, I also want to welcome you back, to USI again. I'm not going to take much of your time. I know you have a lot on your agenda, but I wanted to really express a couple of things real quickly. First of all, I want to just express my sincere appreciation for the commission staff. Quite often, we talk about the leaders that are involved and working with these organizations, but without staff that are so competent, so well skilled and dedicated to the mission, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So I just want to just really applaud your staff, sir. I also want to welcome all of the representatives from all the other universities, my colleagues who are here representing their campuses in such a good way, really important. But then also, I'm hopeful that you all are able to walk away from this campus understanding the significance of what we believe in on this thing called return on investment. I selected those individuals last night to speak because I want you all to see impact and bottom line. We are working hard to serve this entire state. Every time I go before the General Assembly, I'm indicating my desire to have USI be seen as an institution that can respond beyond the Southwest corner. That we are the answer, that we want to be able to provide the resources and the intellectual know-how and also the engagement to provide answers to our most difficult problems. I'm excited about that possibility. So please call upon this very lean, very nimble, very quick responding campus to those issues. And then last but not least, I want to thank Commissioner Lowry. Just recently, he invited all the university presidents to Indianapolis. We were there Monday, in fact. We spent an afternoon with incredible, robust discussion about issues that are facing our state. I'm excited because we walked away with the conclusion that we, as university presidents, all 7 of us on the public side, want to be a part of a collaboration. Each of us have specific needs for our campuses, but oh, what a mighty opportunity we came together to talk about how we serve all Hoosiers across the state of Indiana. This commissioner provided that leadership, that challenge, that direction, and also, I think, that opportunity. Mr. Commissioner, I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to congratulate you thus far. Don't burn yourself out, sir. You are running fast. We're thankful for that. Mr. Chairman, I wish you all a great meeting today. If you need anything, text me. I'll make sure you have it. Okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah, you will have an amazing day. I feel so blessed to have you all on our campus, providing this opportunity for you to engage in business. So thank you very much.
Okay, so I have some notes for the chair's report, and then we'll go on to Commissioner Lowry. I'm pleased to report that the registration is going live for the Commission's virtual education value convening to be held on December 14th. This convening will share best practices and new information with our community partners and higher education practitioners. The next thing is something I'm going to be redundant about, and mentioned it back in August, I believe, at Ball State. But at a previous meeting, I talked about issues in the early childhood sector, and I received some updates on what one institution is doing to assist with the sector. Ivy Tech Foundation, Ivy Tech Community College statewide systems offices have received $250,000 from the Lilly Endowment to support planning grant activities focused on addressing various workforce issues within the early childhood sector. Given Ivy Tech's ability to credential, convene, and scale, they are uniquely positioned to create a surge of 10,000 workers in the early childhood sector and lead our communities in developing solutions to address early childhood at the local level. They will use the grant to develop a plan to address 4 areas. The first is addressing a shortage of credentialed workers, workforce individuals in early childhood jobs. The second is to address the lack of available high-quality childcare across the state. The third is to address the low enrollment as well as low degree and certificate completions in accredited early childhood post-secondary education programs. And the fourth is to address the missing local solutions in early childhood statewide, as well as develop a concept, paper, and playbook that can be utilized to systematically address opportunities and to implement solutions across the state. As you know, the lack of broadly available high-quality early childhood center openings in Indiana is placing a strain on the Hoosier economy. This strain impacts the daily activities of parents, businesses, and school systems throughout our state. Ivy Tech recognizes that each community and Ivy Tech service area across the state has a unique set of requirements and available resources that will affect their ability to address the local early childhood gap. Because of these varying conditions, there's a need for a convening process that establishes a framework and a set of goals, but allows for variability in approach and resource allocation. And I bring this up as a specific example that I'll give probably at the next meeting in Muncie that's just starting, so it's a little premature, but it's an exciting potential partnership between business, Ivy Tech, and maybe another institution that could be one of the ways we could at least adjust and solve things on a local level, and would be a great model for other areas of the state. So this only affects a few of us. Anyone that was a child, has children, knows children, likes the economy to be positive in the state, and so on. So I will keep bringing it up. But with that, Commissioner Lowry, I am finished with my chair's remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking to see if President Sean was still here. Well, I'm going to reference him really quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, commission members, our university and other partners in the audience today. And real quickly, as I get started, I have to give kudos and props, especially as President Sean was saying, to our team, and very specifically to Sean, who has been pinch hitting this week in preparation for this meeting. Charlie is on vacation. Of course, we've had this change in staffing. We have an individual who has accepted an offer, by the way, to be our new assistant commissioner for strategic partnerships and events, and we'll be starting with us soon, which I can tell you more about her, which is pretty amazing. Sean, thank you for helping. To present these slides very quickly. I want to share with you, I was struck by several things last night. I thought last night's event was just absolutely splendid. Hearing from employers, Toyota, Deaconess, others, and especially meeting our students, Michaela, Aiden, and Simran, and I'll stop there. And as I thought about it, after sitting there and then going back to the hotel, I really was left with sort of 3 words, and I'll explain these briefly to you. I felt home. I felt a lot of hope. And in that, just a joy that I can only characterize as happiness. Been reading about happiness lately, especially one of my favorite authors, Arthur Brooks, who has a bit to say on that topic. And so I'll share with you, part of the reason I felt home is because someone who meant significance, had a lot of significance in my life, put his thumbprint and handprints all over this place. That was former Governor Bob Ward. And when I see his name and I hear him referenced here, it's wonderful. And I saw a lot of hope in what those employers were talking about, and those students. I mean, they were just, I told various of them, I just wanted to record them. They represented why we should think seriously about higher education. And of course, that led to happiness. So I'll say this to you. This university became University of Southern Indiana, having been a satellite prior to that in 1985. That was the year I went to work for Bob Ward in the second term, and he, again, had much to do with that. He also saw to it a couple of years later that Indiana be bold and make a commitment to our state that would last well beyond his days in the service. And that was to recruit our first Japanese-owned automobile manufacturer to our state. That was Subaru. He caught a lot of grief for it. Now, this is the only state in the nation with 3 Japanese automobile manufacturing companies: Subaru, Toyota, and Honda. And, in that I found hope. He was someone who, perhaps one of the most important things I learned from him was you think strategically, you think with vision, you think about things that will happen and outlast your time here. And all of those, I found a lot of happiness and a lot of hope. And by the way, look at this beautiful campus. How can you just not be hopeful and happy and seeing the students? So thanks for letting me share that. It was really an inspirational evening. I shared a little bit of that with President Rashawn. I'm going to be brief and get done here because the really, I think, thing you're going to find interesting, we've invited a guest who will join here in a minute. I think many of you know him. I'll introduce him more fully in a second. Jason Cloth from Ascend, Indiana, the President and CEO. You're the second leadership group who is going to hear from Jason since they released last Thursday a new and fascinating and sobering report on the marketplace supply and demand challenges we face as a state. The first group was that group of state presidents to which President Rashawn referred. That happened Monday afternoon during our very robust 3-hour meeting. So we'll get to Jason in a minute. A couple of quick updates for you. I sent you an email. I think you all saw this. We're really quite pleased. The Frank O'Bannon scholarship will be increased schedule on that. We shared a bit of detail on that. The last adjustment to that was made in 2009, and it was to address the challenges of the recession and challenges with tax receipts. We built up a nice reserve there. It will go back to 2009 rates plus adjustments for inflation. So that's good news. And hats off to folks like the governor and state budget director, legislative leaders who, once we assured them we would manage it prudently, were very supportive. So if you see any of those folks, tell them thank you if you would. Our learning employment record, or LER, you heard Ken Sauer talk some about this. This is really quite groundbreaking. Ken is going to provide an update this afternoon. We received what was a full $150,000 grant. You can see it there from NGA, National Governors Association, to really help take our state into the digital future as we think about credentials and portability of those, the ability for employers to more easily access talent, and for individuals to be able to take that credential with them in electronic fashion wherever they go, and also, if you will, for sort of the matching of that across that spectrum. So Ken's going to share more with you, and within that, you'll see the last bullet point here. This is something on which Stacy Townsley is working along with Ken and the team on credit for prior learning. That is going to be especially significant and play into this learner employment record as we really lean into what it means to have credit for prior learning. I'll share with you the folks at Purdue Global. I was with those folks and others yesterday morning, and they award fully 25% of all of their credits via credit for prior learning. That's stunning. And among other things, it recognizes and honors adults for what they have learned outside of the classroom and makes that transferable. So you'll hear more on that. And then, President Rashawn mentioned this. I'll just briefly say it again. We had a 3-hour meeting at 16 Tech on Monday. The university presidents and I did. Jason joined us for a while. And, it was really robust. It was a chance for those folks to start to get to know each other better. They really haven't met, very often at all, once in a while with the governor. I took this as a good sign. I had proposed that we meet 3 times a year and was hoping by the end of that meeting, they would be agreeable to that. And actually what we're going to be doing is meeting 6 times a year. Every other time will be in person. And the other times will be virtual. By the way, that was a suggestion coming forth from them, not from me. So we'll take that as a good sign. And, I think President Rashawn talked about that collegiality and that collaboration that I think is very promising here. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to our friend Jason Clove. A lot of great things I could say about him. He's been an extraordinary partner for me through the years on a lot of work here in Indiana with the workforce, with education and training. But, he and his colleagues released a week ago today, I think it was, Jason, the reports you'll see here, Indiana's evolving labor market. And it really is fascinating. I'll share this with you. We could spend 3 hours with Jason, but we can't. And he and I both know that. So it's 9:20 and our goal is to be finished with his presentation by 10:10. So about 50 minutes. What my guess is that this will generate questions even more than we have time for. And Jason and I will figure out a way to accommodate those after this session too. If we want to do a virtual gathering for anyone who's interested, really dig into this, we'll do so. Jason, thanks for joining us. Thanks for driving down here. He and I talked, and I just saw how splendidly well just the topic was being received from the university presidents that we were going to be able to do that with them on Monday. It seemed appropriate that you all would be the second group of leaderships post-release of this report with whom to share this information. Jason, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. As Chris mentioned, I lead Ascend Indiana, part of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. Our vision is for Indiana to be a place of economic opportunity for all. And the way we do that is by connecting people to careers, building partnerships between employers and education institutions that result in costly new supply of talent directly into businesses. And then finally, taking what we learn and informing research and public policy. And the report that I'm here going to share with you momentarily is really focused on the demand side of Indiana's labor market. What are we seeing in terms of jobs being produced and the level of educational attainment required to obtain those jobs? And we use Burning Glass, MZ, now Lightcast data to map that, as well as projections. And then secondarily, the supply of talent, looking at the K-12 system through enrollment, degree concentration, persistence, and completion, all the way into employment. So we were able to use the Department of Education data with commission data, with DWD and IRS data to be able to map that out. And then we look at the areas of alignment and misalignment in the market with specific policy recommendations. So I hope this will be informative. Feel free to ask questions, and I will do my best to move quickly through the content of the request. So I'll start off just by grounding us in the key findings. This is very difficult to read, so I'll summarize it. The first is that the COVID-19 pandemic seems to have rapidly accelerated macroeconomic trends that were already afoot, where the demand for more highly educated workers is increasing, whereas the demand for individuals with a high school degree or no formal education is At some parts of the state, it's increasing. In some parts of the state, it's flat and potentially even forecasted to decline. That's particularly true for Marion County, which has some very troubling findings on both the demand and the supply side. There are equity gaps that are persistent, both in terms of gender and racial background at every stage of the system, from early childhood education to K-12, post-secondary, and then wages. And then finally, there's a lot that we need to be doing in terms of data and policy to modernize the way that we think about the talent ecosystem in the state of Indiana. But I'll start just by looking at the demand. We did it in-house. Yeah. We're using a tool called Power BI, if you're not familiar with it, but it allows us to be able to manipulate data in ways that you typically cannot in presentations. So we're starting out with light cast analysis of demand and then the ability to fill jobs. So on the left here, what you see are job postings for individuals with a high school diploma or no formal education. And that dotted line across the top is the ability of employers to fill those jobs. So we have been filling those jobs, though the market has gotten increasingly tight as we recover from the pandemic. On the right-hand side, you see job postings for individuals that require some level of post-secondary education, associate degree or baccalaureate degree. And as you can see, we're not filling those jobs. So what we have is a tightening labor market on both sides, but a truly tight labor market for individuals that have post-secondary education. The problem with this is that you see this reflected in the different experiences that employees have dependent upon their level of educational attainment.
Can you go back? What is on the left side?
The left side is job postings for individuals that don't require post-secondary education, and the dotted line is hires in those areas.
So the hires is exceeding the openings,
Yes, well, postings,
postings.
yes. Whereas the hires for post-secondary are not exceeding the postings.
Got it. Thank you. Which also,
Go ahead.
Which Jason also translates into the disaggregation of our unemployment rates in Indiana, where it's about 4.5% unemployment for a high school diploma, it's 0.9% for a bachelor's degree and higher.
So now we're looking at forecasted off the base in 2020 job growth. And this is across all levels of educational attainment. So the MSA, we were only able to obtain data through MPH for Indiana as the whole, Marion County and the MSA. But what you see is strong job growth across the MSA at 6.28%, strong growth across the state at 4.5, give or take, and then flat growth for Marion County. What's particularly problematic here, though, is when you look at the educational attainment levels, and this is a particular challenge for Indianapolis, when you look at some college no degree or a high school degree, and you filter on those specific, when it's not just catching up, what you'll see is that we're actually forecasting a decline in jobs for individuals that have that level of educational attainment in Marion County. So that means you're going to have a high concentration of individuals with that level of educational attainment with very limited mobility, living in a place where there's a declining number of jobs for those individuals to fill, which will put a lot of additional, will have a huge impact on the city's ability to respond to public safety, public health, et cetera. And so we then go a little bit deeper into that, and we look at it by educational attainment. So this is the state of Indiana. The orange bar, and we're now looking back to 2011 through 2028. So we had strong job growth for individuals with a high school diploma, as well as for the blue bar, which has no formal education, and then for baccalaureate degrees across all dimensions. And then we go into COVID, and what we see is that 700,000 individuals that were unemployed disproportionately impacted people with just a high school degree or no formal education. And then those jobs are projected to grow back close to pre-COVID levels by 2028. But what's also interesting is that the bachelor's bachelor's degrees saw much less of an impact due to COVID. And then for the first time, to my knowledge, they exceed the growth rate of high school diplomas and no formal education. And then when we filter that same data set by, for Marion County, just to put a cap on this. You see that baccalaureate degree continues to rise, and then no formal education and a high school diploma is dropping off. And part of the issue here is the tax policy in the state. You're taxed where you live as opposed to where you work. But those individuals are commuting into the city of Indianapolis for their jobs that require a bachelor's degree. And we have less jobs for people with just a high school diploma or no formal education. That's a very challenging situation for the city. So,
Question,
yeah,
on the no formal education, what population would that be?
that would be someone that didn't graduate from high school.
Okay, so they may have grade school or something like that, but no
Yes.
degree. Okay, thanks.
And actually, what's really problematic as we go further into this is when you look at the median wages across these different levels of educational attainment, I mean, it's suboptimal. to say the least. So that's just this bar chart form. So here what we're looking at are the wages associated with different types of jobs and educational attainment levels. So this narrative that college is invaluable that Judd, you and I were talking about this morning, the median wage anticipated for those jobs that require a bachelor's degree is quite high, whereas jobs that require no formal education that we're going to grow typically pay. So then what we wanted to do is look at who's holding those jobs. So disproportionately Black and Latino Hispanic individuals are the ones that are going to be holding those jobs based on their educational attainment. It's also interesting that men are disproportionately likely to hold those jobs. And that will come into play when we look at automation risk. So here we're looking at, if you're able to zoom in closer, we're looking at occupations. These are occupation codes. And we're looking at the distribution of people holding those occupations. So here we're looking at construction and extraction. You can see this light pink dot that represents women. They're dramatically less likely to be in construction and extraction than men, which makes sense. But the reason we wanted to highlight this is that a lot of this, what occupations individuals choose, what degrees they choose, show up in pronounced ways in terms of median wages later on. So as you likely know, we're number 1 or 2 in the country in terms of risk for automation. This just shows the blue and the red are jobs that are high risk for automation. And again, it shows that Latino, Hispanic, and Black populations are more, their jobs are more at risk of automation, as are the jobs that women hold. So now this is a particularly telling slide. So this is actual wages for actual Hoosiers, the median wage, and we can see it by educational attainment and by number of years after graduation. So a high school diploma, 1 year after graduating, the average Hoosier makes $14,870 with a high school diploma. At 5 years, those individuals make, it will be $29,000 once year catches up. But there's a very large and pronounced racial gap between Black and white individuals. So it's $29,000 for whites, $21,000 for Black individuals with just a high school diploma. There we go. You can see the drop down. Now, when we look at short-term credentials, which is where we're seeing all of our growth in post-secondary educational attainment, we wanted to see what were the wages associated with those. And the median wage for an individual with a short-term credential is $20,000 1 year after completing. After 5 years, there is some bump, but we go to, I think it's $30,000 as the catches up. on average for an individual with a short-term credential. So the wage bumps aren't as high as we would like to see. And then when we look at bachelor's degrees, not sure here, computers.
I think it's just a white guy.
Okay. So when we look at bachelor's degrees, the individual with a bachelor's degree will jump to $47,000 as the average wage. But there are very, again, pronounced gaps between men and women. So the median wage for a man is $53,000 per year with a bachelor's degree. A woman's is $43,000. So a 20 percentage point gap. And then again, large gaps between Black and white individuals as they progress through. Here we go. So there you can see the first year with a bachelor's degree is $33,000. And then after 5 years with a bachelor's degree, it gets to 47. And again, a big gap between Blacks and other racial groups and men and women. So that really shows the demand side of the labor market. I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions. Yes.
Yeah, and Jason, this is fascinating, and I'm trying to mentally go over what I know about what's happening in the state and investment partnerships, semiconductor manufacturing, all these sorts of things. A lot of it feels to me like it's in right, so from a policy prescription standpoint, I'm wondering what we can do. The skill set required to work in that kind of environment is higher. The number of low skill work, number of low skill positions is probably lower. And I'm trying to make sense of how all of this adds up. And like, what's the rational policy decision that we can think about that incentivizes the right things to create the set of jobs that we need? Because it feels worrisome in a whole bunch of ways, and then the kind of meta level worrisome for me is what I'm trying to unravel in my mind. Can you help me think through that?
Sure. So I think there are a few things I would say. One is we need jobs we need greater productivity over time if we're going to be competitive. So on the demand side, we want to move from industry 2.0 to 3.0 to 4.0. We want those jobs to require additional levels of skill. We also need people that have sufficient education to take those jobs because they're typically going to be higher paying. And so I think if my perspective is, how do we as a state think about what are the jobs that we want to be growing? What is our strategy for attracting specific types of companies based on our unique strengths? And how does that get communicated to the supply side? And then how do we make sure that we're producing the types of credentials and degrees that are most likely to lead to individuals being able to fill those better paying jobs, and then creating a virtuous cycle where more companies want to come here that offer those types of jobs. And today we have a very fragmented system. We have the IADC going and chasing jobs, but when I ask the university presidents, to what degree do you communicate with the IADC about their 5-year strategy for bringing in specific types of employers? They said there's very little communication that occurs between the demand side and the supply side. I think that secondarily to that, on the K-12 side, we have this sort of fragmented early childhood private market space that we've all highlighted or Judd highlighted earlier. Then we have a K-12 system that's underperforming, that doesn't really speak to the post-secondary education system. And then we have the post-secondary, which is private payer. And then there's really no adult learning system for people to get additional skills. And we have basically federal policy that's been cobbled together over the last 100 years. It's programmatic. It's like money for JAG, money for these programs and that program, as opposed to a system that says, hey, we should be building the talent system broadly to be responsive to the needs that we see on the demand side of the labor market. And that policy framework doesn't exist anywhere in the country. And that's where my personal view is that we should be headed.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
The other thing that you said, the word that you said that stuck in my mind was mobility, like
Yeah.
labor market mobility. And I wonder if you all have any sense of projection of what that looks like, because we have this data that says that higher education folks don't always stay in the state once they graduate. And that feels like an important, like a a forecast on that feels sort of important to me, so what do you know about that?
We are going to get there in the misalignment. We have a very clear picture of that. So now just looking at demographics on the supply side, this shows a snapshot in time. Indianapolis population changed by age groups 2011 to 2021. So as you know, we have a large group of baby boomers that are retiring or exiting the labor market. And then we see decline in population and some site growth. And then after September 11th, as you know, we have lower birth rates. And so this was expected to hit higher education just as a demographic trend in a way that would meaningfully affect enrollments. But I think what's problematic is over the last 10 years, we've seen a natural decline when the market's signaling that you need that post-secondary education. The other thing I just want to highlight here is that the state is becoming more diverse. White non-Hispanics are the only group that are declining in population across the state. So this shows labor market participation disaggregated by race and gender. If we could go back to 1997, we would see that Indiana's labor force participation was 71%. Today, despite having very low unemployment, labor market participation is 60% across the state. So we have low unemployment and high or low labor market participation. The other interesting dimension is that after COVID, all groups regained to pre-COVID levels, except for women. Women have stayed out of the labor market and have not recovered. And that is, I think, largely related to access to high quality early childhood education.
So this goes back to that question that we keep asking. If it was 71%, now it's 60%, and unemployment is low, then where is the labor market?
Yeah, I think this is one of, and I'm going to show another slide later. We've got to get a handle on how do we know where people are after they leave the education system, because we do not have a good sense, to my knowledge, and others may, what are these individuals in fact doing?
But you,
Yeah,
people without a high school, but I'm just
yeah,
thinking of national numbers that stick kind of in my head. The labor force participation for someone without a high school degree is in the 40s, and it gradually goes up over time. I mean, it gradually goes up tied to your education. High school is a little higher. And I mean, my own, I think people, government support has increased, and therefore people don't feel compelled to work if their wages are low. And I think that's had an impact. I think a question I want to pose though is this women participation. Why were they participating at a higher level prior to the pandemic and less after the pandemic? I mean, what has changed? They still had the child care challenges prior to the pandemic.
yeah. So I think one could be choices that people make about coming out of COVID, how they want to lead their lives. I think the other impact is that the actual accessibility of childcare is down substantially. So I was talking to Maureen Weber yesterday, and she said that at Early Learning Indiana, which is our largest high quality early childcare provider, she has 254 teaching positions open or within the system. She said she has 54 vacancies that she can't fill. So that means that there's a huge number of classrooms that aren't being filled with children, and those parents may be choosing not to work, particularly if they have two children or more. And so, I think we can look at age level and by racial group, and we do see that, I think, two things that have been alluded to when women and individuals are having families where labor market participation goes down. And then the second is there is disturbing information about men's participation in the labor market, particularly at younger ages, that we haven't historically seen. Or to my knowledge, that's gone down dramatically over time. But I do think the accessibility is a big piece. I'm sorry.
And just going back to that question about where are they? I mean, we have to know that they're missing because of the age group that they should be in the labor market.
Yeah.
So we just don't have data on that subset?
We highlighted as one of the key findings, we need better data. To my knowledge, I don't I don't know that we can track and find people once they exit out of the education system. And that's a big problem because as you'll see in the funnel analysis, once they're out, if we don't have a way to re-engage them, that's a big problem because to your point now, as they get more education, they're more likely to participate in the labor force. But if we lose track of them, it's hard to engage that group.
And I would add, Edward, Allie, you have hit on some of my key concerns and directly related to labor participation. Al, I was sitting and thinking too, I think the very latest numbers in Indiana go up to the 4 scales here from no high school diploma, some college or associate degree, bachelor's and higher, right? 42% of their participation. Looking at Sean, to correct me, 55, about 62% and 73%. If we could address some of that, right, below the bachelor's degree, we're going to solve a whole lot of our talent supply issues. And then, the topic you hit on, Pepper, about where are our folks? I just try to be very blunt about it. One of my greatest concerns is around what's happening with young men because their trend for the going rate has been down steeper than the average. Indiana's down steeper than the US average. Young men is down even steeper, 46% versus 61% for young women. That's a gap that's growing. And their labor participation rates are also declining. As I've been saying, they are choosing not to go to college, university, some form of training, into the labor market. And I think it's a fundamental issue you have to address because it erodes the fabric of civil society. Absolutely convinced of that. Absolutely right.
And I think to that, I had a conversation recently with a large property manager, property owner that has more than 25,000 residents in their apartments. And, they said that there's a real fear amongst residents that have access to subsidized housing that if they start to earn a certain level of income, that will jeopardize their accessibility to that subsidized housing. I think we saw in COVID, right, we carried on those unemployment insurance benefits, in my opinion, after the vaccines were available too long. You constrict the supply side of the labor market and pump a ton of money into it. And we shouldn't be surprised that we have low labor market participation and inflation.
So
Sorry.
no, I can ask, so I just want to make sure I heard something. You said the average first year for somebody with a 4-year degree is 33,000.
Yeah, and then 47,000 after 5.
So, and I just did the math on a 2080 year, it's $15.86 an hour for somebody with a bachelor's degree in the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
That may be the average, but that's not what I'm seeing with children and their friends and at least they're starting significantly ahead of that. So I guess there's got to be something that's really dragging that average down.
I mean, most of my young hires with college degrees, they're all starting at, $50,000.
It's the fact that it's 1 year out. So, a student, there's actually a shockingly high rate of students that have not been employed in the types of jobs that you might be thinking about. So they might be employed and they might still have the job they had in the first year that they had when they were in college, right?
That might be one of the reasons why our college graduates aren't staying here, because that first year's wage is what they're looking at. And yeah, they're getting $30 an hour someplace else. Doesn't matter. 15.86 or 30. I know where I'm going.
Sean, I don't know if we have data, but the percentage of college graduates that are employed at the time that they graduate is not as high as you would think, which would skew that first year wage down.
Is it a partial year with most of them graduating in May, or could that be part of it too? Or is it a full calendar year?
It's a full calendar year. So I'm going to keep moving. You were raising really good questions. So this is the high school graduation rate in the state. It's been pretty consistent. But what you see is big differences in the types of diplomas that individuals graduate from high school with. The honors diploma correlates to enrollment and persistence in college. The general and the 440 diplomas do not correlate as strongly. And so what we see are women, Asian Americans, and white Americans are significantly more likely to graduate with an honors diploma. One thing I would suggest that we need to be thinking about as a state is what does a high school diploma mean? And how are we going to measure that going forward? The other data point that I wanted to share with you is around the usage of what's called a waiver to graduate from high school. So waivers were designed for very unique circumstances to enable a student that was unable to pass a 10th grade English language arts exam or Algebra 1 exam to be able to graduate at the discretion of a principal and a superintendent. The proliferation of the use of waivers as the means of graduating from high school is profound. So 24% of all Black students in the state of Indiana are graduating with a waiver, meaning they're not able to pass those basic skills exams. But the numbers are high across all groups, and they're particularly high for Marion County, where you see that, you know, we're getting close to 16% or so of all students graduating with a waiver. So if you've been to Indianapolis, you think about Lawrence Township, for instance, 25% of all high school graduates graduate with a waiver. If you look at, I got an email from the school district I live in, Washington Township, saying, you know, we have one of the highest graduation rates, but 20% of those students are graduating with the use of a waiver. And so I think there's not the transparency that we need in the system to communicate to families appropriately. And then this shows college enrollment, which you all are very familiar with, declining to 53%. At the same time that the labor market suggesting there's a tremendous value.
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah, sure.
Just wanted to see if you, okay, I just was trying to, this comment that Commissioner made in regard to male and female and the growing gap between those.
Yeah, so
It really is incredibly concerning. And then if you go back to the high school slide, with the gap showing, you know, honor degrees between male and female are also a significant gap. It's somehow we've lost males as they're going through the process.
When you play this story out and you see the interconnectedness at each stage, it's very clear how we end up in the situation that we're in. It's like, okay, we look at the type of diplomas people get, and then we see that show up in their enrollment. Like it's when you tie all the pieces together, you see how we land. Commissioner Boone.
With your data, are you accounting for what the population is too? Are you where it's like, okay, there's maybe more females or more males in the population? So are you comparing it to what the actual population counts are in each demographic and then showing us that number segmented?
This is just the percentage of all individuals that are high school students that enroll.
So I guess when we're seeing the big gap between, you know, the races, are you accounting that there are just generally more white males and females in our population than?
This is just the percentage of that group.
The answer is yes. To her question.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, the one thing the males, I mean, if you look at that, or you look at African American, is there a substance abuse problem that has grown that contributed?
Yeah, well, so there is a substance use disorder problem that's grown dramatically. But what's been fascinating, you know, I mentioned earlier, we do this work to bring together employers and education institutions to build supply of talent. What's fascinating is the increase in substance use disorder, which was going up pre-COVID and then only accelerated on the demand side. But the ability of those individuals to get treatment is very much related to higher education. So because of Medicaid and private insurance reimbursement rates, healthcare systems are only financially inclined to provide treatment through licensed clinical social workers and licensed clinical addictions counselors. To become one of those requires a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a 2,000-hour practicum for a $55,000 a year job. So not surprisingly, there's not a lot of people that are going into that profession because of the level of educational attainment and the financial reward at the back end. So there are all these public policy implications that are wrapped up in that. We have to think about licensing. We have to think about what's truly needed to be able to provide that kind of treatment for people. We have to think about reimbursement rates if we are taking mental health seriously. But the short answer to your question is yes, there's a problem.
It'd be interesting, you don't have a slide, it'd be interesting, you ought to do a little study.
Yeah, we'll capture all these sort of questions we need to answer and look into that.
And not to belabor it, but it was bad before COVID.
Yeah.
It's even worse now. I mean, it's dramatic. What I've read.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you just look at the national data on it, it's very clear. As I think the suicide rate has gone up substantially.
And Jason, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we also know, as we've shown a bit of this data, that with increases in post-secondary attainment, also mitigate a lot of these types of concerns. Not just, for example, the labor participation rates for males or anyone else, but we also see decreases per capita in individuals with increased levels of post-secondary attainment. Waiting on all these things. One number that jumped out at me, again, Sean will correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the likelihood of death from opioids is 7 times higher for someone with less than a high school diploma than it is for the folks in this room that have bachelor's degrees and higher. 7 times. Infant mortality is 2 times. Life expectancy is 12 years.
So that slide earlier that showed the decline in jobs for people with a high school diploma or no degree, all of that is going to be a group of people that are going to have those that are going to be representative of the statistics that were just shared. How are we going to offset those costs?
This is where I get in trouble for being harsh, but the realist in me, with every society has a finite amount of funds to throw at every problem.
Yeah.
And how much of that do we want to dedicate to a population that's chosen bad decisions? And then what are the implications if we do?
That's
Jason, I hate to do this because this is fascinating information, and I know you've got more I want to share. But one of the things that keeps going through my mind is I was looking at all of this, and we've spent years working on K-12 reform, higher education reform, all kinds of things we've tried to get in place, and we're not moving the needle. In fact, we're declining. We have a disastrous K-12 system in our state. It's a failure, 100% failure, and we're not addressing it. The thing that I keep coming back to is what is the nexus of the problem? In manufacturing, if you see a problem and you fix that problem without understanding what the source of the problem is, you don't get a different result. You just compound the problems that you have. One of the things that I had decades of being involved with K-12 reform and higher ed and all that kind of stuff, we've never addressed what is the nexus of the problem that we're dealing with. We keep trying to fix symptoms, but we're not identifying what is the nexus of the problem. And I don't know how we get there. I don't have any answers. I'm just suggesting that we're laying out information that is extremely disturbing in my view. And when I think over the last 30 years, Al and I have been, involved so deeply in K-12 reform and higher education, all those kind of things. I mean, so many changes to try to solve the problem, but we're not solving the problem. So I guess the question that keeps going through your mind is, what is the source of the problem? And how do we get at fixing the source of the problem? And I know that's a whole other discussion, and we could spend hours on it. But until we figure out the nexus of the problems, all of this data and the little things that we might twist and turn and change, I don't know if 30 years from now, we're going to be sitting here with the same concerns. So,
I wish that I had the silver bullet solution to that. I think it's, sadly, I don't know if it's a silver bullet or it's silver buckshot. I don't. But I think the thing that I would say is that we need leaders at every level of the state that have a clear-eyed understanding of what the problem is, why that problem exists, and then we tackle it solution by solution. But when I was deputy mayor of the city overseeing the charters schools, we grew from 22 to 39 and we closed 5 schools. Closing schools is horrible. It's a horribly difficult thing to do, but they didn't meet the obligations they laid out in their charter agreements. And so I think, you know, to what degree do we collectively as leaders have an appetite to do those types of things that need to be done? Like, to what degree do we have the appetite to say, hey, like, we need to start reining in unemployment insurance. People need to go take it on themselves to get vaccinated. Like, and I think that for whatever reason, we're punting on a lot of problems when we have some wisdom that can be brought to bear. But anyway, that's. So, in terms of, excuse me, yeah, please.
Make a comment along with that. I think, first of all, Chris, thank you for doing this, Mr. Chairman. This is extremely important because it speaks to the dynamic nature of human beings in our lives and how we often change. Sometimes bad decisions at 18 turn into something different at 30, and our circumstances are all different from the beginning. But from the beginning, this early childhood education issue just seems to be something that is constant. And because I think of automation in the economy, it leads me to the word adaptability. And so if IEPC's running after the companies that are there today, which they should be doing, they're not necessarily able to look into what's going to come 15 years from now, but we also know that educated individuals seem to be more adaptable. And so I would be interested in knowing if you followed some of the majors along the course here to see if the folks that are in those income brackets you're talking about are still in the same area that they started off wanting to be in or thinking they wanted to be in when they were in college. And speaking, because, you know, those other demographics seem to be locked in place. You talked about increased unemployability for certain demographics within urban areas, and then also being geographically sort of stuck in those areas as a problem. And some of those adaptability issues are beyond their control in terms of transportation and other things, but just the core of education. And I know I'm rambling here a little bit. I guess my question is about adaptability with education and how that appears within the data and what we can learn from that. And then the second point being, again, the continued stress of the communication within the systems that we do have, which Chris is doing, whether it's the university presidents, IEDC, or so forth. Of all the things I've seen over the years with government, I can't think of anything more important than this group because it's living in these gray area spaces between, you know, education, economy, human dynamics, and other things. And so I encourage you to keep doing it, and I'm very grateful that you're doing it. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I think the responsiveness is sort of what I keep thinking about. How do we have a system that responds in more real time to the changes? And that's both at the individual level and personal responsibility, coupled with what is the system designed to do to be responsive. Both things need to be true. We need to design systems that support people, and people have to have the responsibility and the ability to adapt to what is changing in the economy around them. So I will try to move very quickly through these remaining slides.
But are you seeing that in the data with the graduates?
Oh, yes. So sorry. So for instance, if you get a bachelor's degree in English, the truth is you're likely to take on so I have a Russian history and literature degree and then like build software now. I mean, the thing is that the higher level of educational attainment leads to greater adaptability. One of my fears is that if you give very specialized training, but you don't have adaptability later on, it might provide you a decent living for a period of time. And then as the economy changes, it could lead to despair and an inability to adapt to that new economy. And so what kind of system are we going to create? Or what kind of messaging do we need to have to make people aware you're always going to need to be changing and evolving as the economy evolves? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it seems like for this group, an important one to bring up with these programmatic changes that are presented to us from the institutions from time to time, because I do think some of them are very associated with the current economic trend. So that's the general sort of statement there.
Great. So this just shows the disparities. So for instance, of Black individuals, 10% less likely to graduate than from college than their counterparts. One thing I think is important to isolate here is that we tend to talk about people of color as if it's monolithic. Latino Hispanics graduate at higher rates than whites. They have the highest labor market participation of any racial group.
Which group did you say?
Latino Hispanics. Big differentials in what people study, which shows up in median wages. Men and Asians are 3 times more likely to pursue STEM than other groups. But this is a slide that I think is very illustrative. So what we're looking at here is the 2012-13 high school class. So there were 79,359 high school seniors in the state of Indiana. Of that group, 71,123 went on to graduate with a waiver diploma, an honors diploma, Core 40 diploma, 34,000 enrolled in a public institution, 5,784 went out of state, and 5,498 went to private schools. We can't track them after that, so we lose that group until we have better data. Now, of this, within 6 years, 18,118 graduate with some form of post-secondary education of any type. So our top to bottom conversion rate is 22.8% in the state of Indiana. All that white space that you were alluding to earlier, Commissioner Mulhern, we don't know where these people are, and we don't have a strategy, and that's been confounding. And we know that their median wage is $29,000 after 5 years. So when we look at this for Black individuals, we've talked a lot about equity and making sure that our community is representative. We had 9,125 Black high school seniors. We have 966 that go on to complete in the state of Indiana. Students that grow up in Indiana that stay in Indiana, it's 65%. So the total number of students that our businesses would be looking to hire with post-secondary education from that cohort would be 627 people. They're far less likely to go into STEM. So when we say we want to increase the diversity of our STEM workforce, and that makes up 10% of that population getting those degrees, we have a very small raw number to select from. And then when we looked at this for Marion County, that number top to bottom is 442.
And Jason, because this wasn't sobering enough, keep in mind the college going rate since that class of 2012-13 has declined by 15 points in Indiana.
So we have a very difficult challenge. Unless you're a large employer that can recruit outside the state, it's very unlikely that you're going to have the diversity in the workforce, the entry-level positions that are going to lead you to mid-level management, senior executives, unless we dramatically improve this system. And so now I'm going to show you the misalignment. But this gets to Mike's and your questions. And I find this to be particularly fascinating. So if you are a student that grows up outside of Indiana and goes to college in Indiana, there is a 15% chance we will retain you in the state upon graduation. If you grow up in Indiana, there's a 65% chance that we will retain you in the state of Indiana. We're talking about creating incentives for people to take jobs and live in the state of Indiana. Statistically, the strongest mechanism for retaining someone is to educate them if they grew up here. And so I think something for us to think about is the mix of our schools and where those students are coming from. This chart over here, the red line shows the raw number of people that went to post-secondary education in the state of Indiana that were retained 1 year after graduating. The gold is the group that leave. So overall, we were retaining, but watch what happens as you become more educated in the state of Indiana. Now more people, once you have a bachelor's degree, you're more likely to leave than to stay. When you take a bachelor's degree off and you put a master's degree, you're substantially more likely to leave. And then when you do doctoral degrees, you're substantially more likely to leave. So this speaks to, on some level, job quality, quality of life, a variety of factors that drive that behavior. An important slide, I think. These are the number of short-term credentials that were awarded in the state. And we can see all short-term credentials because we have a state system and the median wages that are associated with them. So 72,000 for mechanical engineering, 75,000 for electricians, 75,000, that's also a different type of electrician. The point here being we should produce more short-term credentials that align to good wages and try to eliminate the short-term credentials that lead people into poverty. And this just shows that distribution relative to an $18 an hour job. So we're producing a lot of credentials that don't align to good employment.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the medical assistant, which is low on the wage scale.
Yeah.
That's central to our ability to deliver healthcare and the whole healthcare model of how people deliver this. And it just feels like, I hear what you're saying, but it feels like a conundrum to say we could get.
Early childhood is $24,000 is what a teacher makes. And, you know, I think the reality is, I don't know that you can get that wage up without going to a public payer system of some kind. You know, and on the MA, to me, the answer there is how do we make sure that MAs move into RN roles or move into other roles? And that becomes the entry point for them. But, you know, that is a incredible challenge.
I only know this because I had one sister who was an RN and one who was an MA. And they tell me that the things that the healthcare system wants the RN to do and the MA to do are different precisely because of the wage structure. And so it's not about the individual and their credential, it's about what the system allows and needs in terms of distribution of roles and skill sets and so forth. And anyway, it just occurred to me that it's a really complicated problem, and it goes back to the public policy element and all of the things you're talking about. It just struck me as how hard a problem this is. It's even, having seen this, it's even harder than I thought it was.
Well, think about nursing, for instance. You know, nursing is a very highly regulated degree. And, you know, the reason that we're paying traveling nurses $300,000 to $500,000 suggests that we have a supply side issue. But our set of solutions to address that are very much public policy issues. The number of adjunct faculty that can teach a course where, you know, there's a bunch of issues that are really at their core constraining the supply from a regulatory position. So this just shows degree, projected job growth and the number of degrees that are being produced. So for instance, a lot of students thinking this is a good path go into business administration, but a lot of those are associate degrees in business administration. They're not baccalaureate degrees. And then similarly, we have a number of fields where we're anticipating a decline in those jobs and we're producing a lot of degrees. But this gets back to your earlier comments, Commissioner Hanna, about like this English language arts. Even though there's not a lot of jobs that are projected to be there, those people tend to be able to get other types of jobs. Whereas a tool and die technician, if they get that skill, how adaptable will that person be? And so just to wrap up on our recommendations, we think at the K-12 level, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around aligned advising and aligned learning. So graduation pathways expands work-based, the need for work-based learning opportunity to graduate from high school, as well as a focus at the secondary level. We think that, along with expanding direct partnerships between employers and education institutions, the relevancy of the education is critically important. We have received a grant to contract with RAND, a think tank, to look at short-term credentials, see which ones stack. Do they actually lead to more education? And which ones align to good degree, good wages? And how do we think about that from a public policy I would argue that we should not be funding a lot of short-term credentials that lead to poverty wages.
And the commission has joined in that work,
Yes.
so the commission members know.
So two of the really, I think, more innovative ideas. One is a transcript clearinghouse. So as a junior in high school, and again, this is an idea, but we would say that every high school in the state have a common digital transcript, that they would provide that transcript in a secure fashion to the Commission for Higher Education as a junior. We're also suggesting that FAFSA completion be mandated for all high school graduates with an opt-out, so anyone can opt out. You've seen this done in Texas, Alabama, Louisiana. They've had high increases in FAFSA completion. And then also, Chris has mentioned PSAT data. If we were able to capture all that in a central location and make it available to all regionally accredited institutions, students could receive basically preliminary admission to institutions as well as scholarship award amounts. So you move to the demand side as opposed to the supply side. So rather than career counselors pushing people in, you now have the colleges and universities pulling them in by having the ability to say, hey, junior in high school, you've been admitted and here's your scholarship award. Streamlined work-based learning reporting, we have no idea what opportunities exist in this state. We would recommend to the unemployment insurance system, and Dan, you and I have talked about this, and you actually looked into it at Cook. But through the unemployment insurance system, having employers report what work-based learning opportunities they have, how many they have, and what's the educational attainment associated, so that we could just aggregate the entire demand side of work-based learning on an annual basis. Expanding the employer training grant, putting a wage floor on it so that people have to be able to get an employer demonstrates they will lead to a better wage. Continued changes to performance funding, and then automatic enrollment in 21st century scholars. So
Good question.
that was a lot.
Chris and I had a little sidebar here. Where does parenting come into this? And awareness and training for parents, and that's across all demographics.
So I mean, it definitely comes into enrollment or completion of FAFSA. I mean, FAFSA is
Maybe even before that, whether it's early childhood, whether it's K through 12. I don't see the third leg of the stool of, there's the institutions, there's the student, him or herself. The third leg of that stool has always been parents.
I think it's the nexus, it's the basis, it's the problem that we just can't seem to address. It's the answer.
And we just don't see the programs to help parents. A million years ago, when I was at Martin Luther King Montessori School, we spent a ton of time with those parents to try to help them understand the importance of education and, beyond preschool. And I don't see that across institutions.
something I think a lot about on the decisions that we've made as a country of late, and things like, student loan forgiveness, the income levels that it was for versus child tax credits or versus things that, the types of programming that you're talking about. We have finite resources. What's the highest and best use of those resources and why? And I'm not sure we've always made the best choices.
I just would say that too, that we need to simplify the way we perhaps approach the parents. And there's some kind of unique ways you can do that I don't think people are really interested in right now, but it's meeting people where they are. Arts and sports are good places to start within our communities, doing messaging and some of the fun places where it's not government or someone else trying to tell people what to do, but rather, feathering in the message with some of the things where people like to be, want to be, so meeting in the middle. And those are probably some things we need to start talking about if we're going to affect anything. Otherwise, I think we're beating our head against the wall. So.
I would just make a very quick comment. I know we're trying to wrap things up. We could have spent hours, for sure, but we could easily spend hours on this. It strikes me, I think your comment was good on, in terms of trying to get to the nexus of the problem, but also the solutions, in my view, have got to include the private sector. And the private sector is not stepping up, I'm not just talking about Indiana, I mean, across the country in helping to solve these issues. And so they have to be part of the overall solutions. And Jason, I know that you have all of the solutions for this, for us to get this, really nailed. Can I ask this question? Have you presented this to the governor's workforce cabinet?
I have not, so I did.
Because if I can help you do that, I do think that you've got this governor's workforce cabinet thing that's going on, and everybody's rushing, trying to figure out what solutions are, and they're throwing ideas out. But they're not doing it from a basis of data and understanding the overall system and that kind of thing. And again, we keep trying to repair and fix, and I think we've got a really rickety old riverboat that's been put together with staples and rubber bands and some glue and all kinds of stuff, and it's not floating. And we've got to figure out how to get back to the core and rebuild it. And I hope that we would be part of it.
And we know somebody at the governor's work.
Is it possible to get a copy?
Oh, yes.
Please,
So-
because I got at least, I think, 362 questions for you, but I need to look at the data.
I will be happy to, if you have questions. I wish I had answers because every time you dig into this, more questions come up. I think just two final thoughts, if I may. I do think, to your point earlier, Chris, I think we have a fundamental structural issue with how this is designed. I think that's probably going to take a certain level of federal. So I think one of this is, we can start doing these things and getting 2%, 3% better throughput maybe, but I do think there are some sort of more core questions about why is WIOA designed in the way that it's designed. I think the second thing is this data, MPH provided it. We're very fortunate to have MPH in our state. It took 8 months to be able to get that data and compile it in this fashion. One thing that I think would be really powerful, to your point about data, would be to produce a report that may not look exactly like this, but something like this 6 months prior to the biennium. That would include every region of the state or even down to the legislative district to show people in those communities what's truly going on in their community. What is the mix of jobs, the mix of education? And I would love it if that was something that the governor's workforce cabinet would advance. I think it could be very powerful. And I would be happy to present it at your request.
And commission members, by the way, that might have already been a request to Jason and his team from your staff. So a couple of quick comments, reaching people where they are, that is critically important. One of the things we've been working on, you may recall, is this idea of this pentagon of government, education, business, philanthropy, and not-for-profits, specifically aimed at the community faith-based organizations. And we've been talking to a lot of folks, all of you, and then a whole lot of other folks around the state, to think about how those parts of our society can help us work on the challenges we talked about today, whether it's reaching parents. And I'm convinced the community faith-based organizations can help us a lot in that regard. And I think there's somebody who is even literally in the midst of saying to us, I want to lead that charge with you in a coalition. You're going to hear, by the way, something very similar from Allison later today when she talks about our inclusion value campaign and who the trusted messengers are. Family, community, faith-based organizations come out a lot higher than government does. I know that's shocking. But that's part of the reason we're putting that emphasis there. But Dan and I looked at each other and said, yeah, go ahead and mention something here. So I mentioned as part of that Pentagon is business, and really having, business with us, part of the solution, seeing problems, what their role is in helping with these challenges. And So from individual business leaders to CICP, to chambers, and et cetera. And, your Dan Peterson recently stepped up and said, Chris, I'd like to lead that for us in this coalition. Dan, you want to comment?
Yeah, no, of course, and I know you're doing this with other sides of the Pentagon, if you will, kind of kitchen cabinets that focus on those different areas, if you will. So to Chris's point about the employer, I was going to make a comment about, I think as you went through that, what you see in all that, in my opinion, is an opportunity for employers, not just business, if you will, but employers to be more strategically, not willy-nilly involved, but collectively and in a coordinated fashion, more involved in informing students, parents, supply side partners, if you will, not just what the first job opportunities are, but the follow-on opportunities, kind of the macro meta areas, and then how do you get to those? What are the educational pathways to get to those roles? I think there's just not enough strategic effort on the part of employers, not for lack of interest on the part, I think, of employers, but probably not a good history and mechanism for allowing that to be done in a coordinated way. And it's got to include parents in my mind, because you now have another generation of parents, in a sense, that don't go back to the 40s and 50s and have that perspective. You've got a generation who, to some degree, doesn't understand the importance of education, now raising another generation. So it just gets harder and harder in my perspective. So long-winded way of saying, this has come up on a number of occasions, and I'm a newer member of the governor's workforce cabinet. When I came on, was asked we broke ourselves into different subgroups to really look aggressively at some things that the cabinet can do, especially in the last couple of years with the current governor's administration. One of those was targeted around employer engagement across the state in a variety of ways. So that effort is, I think, getting more traction. How we go about that and making sure that we use time wisely and get appropriate engagement, et cetera, and get good output is, the rub, if you will. So I think to Chris's point, in parallel on this discussion on cabinet, I think there's an opportunity for workforce in particular to be helpful, employers to be helpful in guiding the work of the commission and others. So yeah, Chris reached out and said, hey, I want a group of folks. So I stepped up and said, I'd be happy to do that, but I know there are a bunch of people at this table who need to be a part of that exercise. So we're working on a list of folks from across the state to help with that. I would encourage anybody who's interested in that, talk to us, talk to me, whatever. But I would also encourage everybody on the commission or out in the audience, if from your own regions in particular, if there are employers that you think really, really get and understand the importance of employers leaning into this type of work, this talent development, talent co-creation, talent effort, please let us know, because we need to make sure we don't want to get, a crew of 1,000 by any means. We need a small advisory group, which is what I think Chris is looking for here, but we need the right folks that represent, different sectors of the economy and also different geographic regions. That's, more to come.
A small part of that, but I do want to just say, we have something called the Ascend Network, which is aggregating employer demand for work-based learning and jobs, and then working with higher ed to identify students and connect them to those opportunities. All of the public institutions have been incredible partners, as well as many of the privates. But we need the employer side too. So thank you so much for the time.
Okay, I think we're going to switch presentations here. Yeah, Jason, thank you again. Jason and I will touch base. I'd really like to provide a forum for all of you to go into this deeper for anyone who might be interested, sort of a colloquium, dig in, ask lots of questions. I know put Jason and his staff through paces on this. I think this is my 5th or 6th time going through this with you, Jason. And each time I hear something new, so we'll figure that out. We'll also send you the link to all of this.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Jason, thanks. And a great partner to the commission on the stage. Yeah, I jotted down a lot of different things I would repeat of. I heard disturbing. I would hope you found it provocative. Quite frankly, we intend to provoke you regularly with information like this. We should have audiences with folks like Jason. We had promised to bring someone to these meetings, hopefully every time, to chime in, join in. You saw Secretary Jenner here a couple months ago, and got somebody in mind for the December meeting too. So please provide any feedback to me you'd like. Hopefully you find this beneficial, and thanks for allowing us to carve out time here. Mr. Chairman, are we ready?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot to do during these meetings, I don't think, except for maybe keep us on time. We're 18 minutes behind right now, so. I'd love to see Jason back here again, give updates. That stuff is so important and it helps set the tone everywhere throughout the state for finding solutions, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how this data progresses as we move along in years here. All right, so your agenda book for the members contains our last meeting for your approval, or minutes from our last meeting. So I need a motion. Second. Any discussion on the minutes? Changes? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Our first item on the docket is, well, it's not going to be staff, it'll be Commissioner Lowry providing the commission's recommendations for the 2023-2025 budget. Commissioner Lowry.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and by the way, Seth Hinshaw sends his apologies and regrets, and I told him didn't need to apologize. He is sick as can be with the flu, and had really wanted to try to make it down here. I said, done. I talked to him twice yesterday. It sounded horrible. But joining me today is going to be Josh Garrison, who you all know, our Associate Commissioner for Public Policy, leads all of our financial aid efforts too. So he's going to join on this. Josh, thanks for doing that. As you'll probably see, just like with Seth, Josh will figure out the really tough questions you have, and I'll try to add color commentary on those. So we will attempt to be crisp about this. I noticed something, Josh, literally before this came up on the screen, that the date on it is not today's date. But there's a significant reason for that. That was the day during which Josh and Seth and I spoke to the governor's office, state budget agency, and I don't know, 95% of the content in here is exactly what we shared with them. Again, trying to stay very congruent with all of you. Met with those folks, as you can tell here, a couple of weeks ago with you. Then we'll also be presenting on December 7th, I think it is, Josh, to the state budget agency or state budget committee, along then with all of the state higher institutions. So this is a final step in that. I'm going to operate off two screens here, one that has my notes on it. I'm going to go really quickly through these. You know these. Jason also, to some degree, reiterated. We're not getting to the big goal we've talked about for a while. We're not the only state, but it does leave us at about 39,52. Key challenges we've identified. Gosh, Jason and I have spent hours talking about these. These are some of the key challenges that we've identified, over which the commission has some purview and or influence. You can see what they are in the going rate, adult education attainment rate, and graduate retention. Here it is, the more in-depth information. What we've talked about around 21st century, FAFSA, Franco-Bannon, communicating value of higher education. Again, Allison is going to speak to that later today. Indiana College Core, you may recall 2 months ago when Michelle started day 4 on the job, day 3 on the job, and we said, yeah, we want to see all high schools offering that in 3 years. And by the way, she is moving rapidly on that plan. Oops. Allison, I think I may have hit a button inadvertently there. I mean, hey, you didn't have to help me there. How about that? The adult attainment side of this, you've heard this before, roughly 1.9 billion. Depending on how you count them, somewhere between 1.8 and 1.9 on those numbers. It's significant. And again, we saw data this morning from Jason that folks without some form of secondary attainment are going to be challenged. And the increases in their wages over their lifetime, their adaptability, and so forth. You can see a little bit of information there. The Workforce Ready Grant and the incredible job it has done to help skill up folks in Indiana. Those are really significant numbers in a matter of 5 years. We talked about this. Again, I can tell you at the meeting we have on Monday with the university presidents that they are leaning into this, recognizing that we have this challenge, 14th best attracting, 40th retaining. And we identified a few other things there. We're working very closely with IEDC and the IDDC on what some strategies are that could be effective. Looking at the funding formula, as you'll see here in a few moments, where can we place some priority on that also. Earn Indiana and some other tools we're going to be leveraging. Again, you've seen some of this probably a couple of times now, so I won't spend much time on it. National landscape, we're going to get back to you on this because it is significant and important to point out. Data adjusted for cost of living, enrollment, and this is 2- and 4-year institutions, 15-year percentage change in state support. You see where the average is. It's the small red bar in the middle there, almost 5% for the U.S. amongst all of the states. Indiana being just a little under 16% decline. That equates to us being 42nd in the nation for the state support higher ed, which is roughly $3,000 less. You can see compared to national averages. And I think you've seen this slide before also. This reflects tuition and fee increases amongst our state institutions over the past. This one is 4%. It's even higher as you might expect with the most recent increases in inflation. I know I went through that really rapidly, but I figured those were slides you've probably seen a few times, and we've had some intentionality in showing those to you a few times. These slides also, I believe you've just seen a few times. It's been, I think Sean and I have just been amazed the number of folks who are using this data now, from businesses to nonprofits and others who are using this slide and the next slide. And that's exactly why we created them, so that this would become more broadly understood and broadly known. We talked about the labor participation rates, column 2 of the data here a little bit earlier today. And you can see across from wage premiums to wealth creation, unemployment rates. Post-secondary attainment matters. Here, again, some of the social factors. Sean and the team and I have looked at a host of other factors, and the bottom line is it translates out the same way. Opportunities and life outcomes that are favorable just increase with post-secondary attainment. Okay, now we're going to get to the staff recommendations and sort of the heart of the matter here. A couple of reminders here, just on things we'll be talking about. Operating, which again is the largest portion of higher ed funding. By the way, Josh is going to jump in here also. We're going to do kind of playing off each other and color commentary. So Josh, don't be shy. I know you won't. Student financial aid, a reminder, we're first in the Midwest, fifth in the nation. And I think it'll be interesting to calculate the effect of the Franco-Bannon grant increases. Once we start seeing the effect of those, I think we may actually improve our national position there. That's pretty substantial. Debt service and capital, institutional line items, both capital projects and institutional line items. I'll sort of tell you a little bit of the story that's coming there. Recent legislation, this was in 366 also, wasn't it, Josh? Yeah, both of those items in Senate Rollback 366 prescribing for us specifically around capital to take a deeper look for the next budget session, so budget session 2025, to come with a robust plan on how we can look at that. Okay, thank you. You'll see in one of our later slides that we are going to be sharing with you that we believe it's really important to come back with a robust strategy and plan for addressing both capital and line items. 366 frankly helps us move in that direction, and it's just clear we need to move there next. Fighting a budget session 2025. So we'll begin really that work in earnest as we get through the upcoming session. So all eyes toward April 30th, hopefully. R&R, we'll talk a little bit about that and the funding of that. Josh will probably jump in there a little more than I will, his nutritional knowledge, and then some of the other higher ed line items that we have some exceptions for. Not sure why it's not advancing, Allison. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, here is the summary page of the recommendations. Again, the Budget Productivity Committee has discussed this. We had a working session too, and this is really a summary of that work that has occurred so far. You will see that on the operating funding side, and again, I know you all are reflecting the fiscal position of the state right now, which has been and is very favorable right now. Although we will get a forecast in December, I think it is, Josh, mid-December?
Yes.
Yeah. From the state, of course, that is something the legislature and the governor and budget agency and so forth will utilize to look at all of the budget requests. But at the operating funding side, you will see over the 2-year period, our request is composed of a increase totaling 6% in the first year, 8% in the second year. And then you can see how that disaggregates, adding to the base, accounting for some of the challenges you've seen in the previous slides, 2% and then 3% in the second year, recognizing that we are recommending to modify the current funding model, the outcomes-based funding model, and in essence, honoring the legacy model with 1% and a 1% and shifting into the prospective model of that in a moment, both from the HCM research that was done, the strategy that was developed when Commissioner Lovers was still here, and Senate Enrolled Act 366 and the sort of parallel direction those took. Prospective funding model of 3% and 4%. So that's how you get the 6% and 8% in the biennium. R&R, you see here, fully funding the formula at 0.5%. Josh, you want to talk about the match, or you want to wait till a later slide?
I'll wait till later slide.
Okay, you can see the increase there. Dual credit, you may recall, at one point until I can't remember how many years back, was at $50 a credit hour, went down to $40 a credit hour. Your recommendation in the past legislative session, again, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, was to go back up to the $50. Legislature did take it up to $45, and now the request is to go back to the 50 because I think everyone is really seeing the strategic importance of dual credit and the ability to give students to sort of have a jump start. Yeah, you've seen some of the numbers. We talked about the decline going rate, but students who are getting dual credit, AP credit, who are completing the potential, passing the test and so forth, just they matriculate at a much higher rate, have just a much higher likelihood of success. That's tied to that. And then capital projects, I alluded to this a little bit, we'll show that in detail. But as we make this transition to what Senate Enrolled Act 366 requires of us for the 2025 budget session, recommendation, which we talked about with Budget and Productivity Committee, is to do the number one priority, which is similar to what you've done in the past, although I think in the 2 years ago, there were no recommendations. Is that right, Josh? Right, and you can see the total there. You know, before we move on, I always want to stop for questions, but I'd really be remiss if I didn't turn to Chris Lamoth and ask him what you might want to have to say about where we're headed, Chris. And really intended to do that before I pulled up this slide, and all of a sudden I just, was on a roll there, but, Chris?
Thanks, Chris. First I want to just thank Chris, Seth, and the team that, the commission have done such a terrific job, working with the budget committee, as we've gone through unbelievable analysis, and putting together the recommendation that the commission members are going to vote on today. I would just say, some things at a high level. This is an aggressive move, a much more aggressive move than the commission has made in the past many years. And part of it is because the state is in a different position, and education and education funding is so critical, that we really felt that we need to make a fairly aggressive move as a commission on behalf of our university partners in the state. Even with this, I can tell you it's less than what the universities would like to have. We had quite aggressive vision from our university partners on things that they would like to do, and we're coming forward with something that we think that there is a good chance that we could get as we work through the legislative session, but unable to support all of the university requests, both operating and capital. Pretty extensive requests. So we really worked hard to come up with something that would make a lot of sense, that we believed we had a shot of working through the legislative process. I will reiterate to our partners in the audience from the universities that this really requires the universities and the Commission for Higher Education to be in absolute lockstep as we go through the General Assembly session. This is going to be a very challenging legislative session, partly because there's excess capital available, and partly because everybody is lined up at the trough wanting significant funding. And so it's going to be, it's going to take a lot of work for us to move this through both the House and Senate to get support for it. So it's going to be critical that we work incredibly together in this budget session, probably more than we've ever really done in the past. So we have focused on increasing operating support. We are also supporting some capital projects, really going to the universities and saying, what is the most important capital project that you can support this year? We're not going to get 10, but we can support maybe one that really makes sense. And then we also are taking a hard look at things like line items, which had been kind of growing over the last few years. And we want to begin to eliminate the line items and move those into university budgets as we move forward. We did talk about R&R, and there is some concern. In the past, we've had a lot of conversations around R&R and both university support for repair and rehabilitation, but also the state support. And how do we get both of those to move up? And then I do want to just say one thing to the commission members, and that is we've always been invited but not encouraged to come to the budget presentation, which is on December 7th. And because this is just such a unique year, a unique budget session that we're going to be going through, those commission members that are able to be there, I think would be very helpful as our team presents. And so I would encourage, we'll probably encourage Chris and his team to get up one more time with details of exactly the date and when and the where, and for those that can attend, I think it would be very helpful. But this is a lean-in budget designed to really begin to reset and position Indiana and our higher education institutions in the direction that we really believe we need to go. And Mr. Chairman, I'll go back over to Mr. Commissioner.
Chris, thank you on several fronts there. And commission members, there is probably no one who has, well, I'll just put it this way, he has to put out a restraining order on Seth or myself or Josh or others in the past several months. So Chris, thank you. we will get you the information on the budget, state budget committee hearing. It is December 7th. It is in the morning. You obviously have a commission meeting, dinner, and so forth later that day. It is in Indianapolis, which makes it a bit easier, and then the commission meeting the next day. That'll work out well. I think it's interesting. Our presentation will literally be the first one for anyone as we jump toward the legislative session, and then the universities will follow our presentation over the rest of that day. I think that's right, isn't it, Josh?
Yeah, very first presentation.
So we're going to come out of the gates hopefully fairly strong here. We'll get you the time. We'll send that to you. I think it's like 9 or 10 in the morning. And Chris, thanks for mentioning that. I think it'd be terrific if y'all were there for it. And frankly, other times over the following 4 months that we could use a boost. I'm shy about asking, you know that. The operating budget, we referenced this a little bit earlier. I just wanted you to know some of the detail there. Again, this very much is predicated on 2 key factors. Chris Lamothe also mentioned those: the fiscal position of the state, and also very importantly, where we have been over the past 10 or 15 years in total funding. Our institutions are principally funded by tuition and by state support. And, I think those have been managed with sincere fiscal prudence. So that, as I said, is really a predicate to this. The outcomes-based funding legacy, the primary thing within this area, in 1% and 1% over the biennium, is that there's not reallocation. I'm going to show you a slide in about 3 slides that I just really found fascinating. I don't know, Seth, Sean, Josh, who gets credit for it, but showing how the outcomes-based performance funding formula has evolved over the years. And I think it's rather interesting, and says that it has evolved. But part of that was many years ago, a reallocation method was established. And again, team, correct me or someone here if I'm wrong. I think that was during a tight fiscal time, rather than new funding, reallocation. Josh, give me the nod there. I have been listening, Josh, everything. But a reallocation model was created because of that tight position. And with the legacy model, and as we've shared many times in the past few months, the new model for interim period with legacy and then shifting to the new model would be new funding, similar to Obama and some of those things, going back and saying this is where we were as a state at that time, especially in the Great Recession, and adjusting for it. Josh, you want to weigh in here?
Around reallocation?
On the legacy model. Don't feel compelled to, but you probably know it from a staffing, and I'm looking at Sean, you probably know it from a staffing standpoint as well.
Yeah, so with the legacy model, it was time for an update. I think what we're doing here is allowing for the institutions that did make progress against what we asked of them this last biennium to still earn in that field. So the big change here, as Chris mentioned, is that no reallocation. The change was made during the Great Recession because, as I think you heard Teresa say constantly, performance matters, even when there is no new money. So that was a change back then. So the model has aged out at this point, which required the update that we're making right now. And it does exclude, as it says up there, the IU School of Medicine, Dentistry, the IU Fort Wayne programs, and Purdue College of Veterinary Medicine as well.
And you might want to continue on this one too, speak to this one if you don't mind. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Before we get there, I guess, could we speak a little bit more about reallocations? I know from other state agencies, they're sometimes called reversions, where you're either giving money back to the state or you're having to take some out. And I think I would like to make sure all the commission members understand how truly painful that is for the organizations, and why give money and then take it away? I don't know, Josh, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, so the reallocation that we did here is a little bit different than the way that reversions are done with state agencies. So for
I was gonna say, but still with pay.
Still okay, yeah. So for our versions, each year we have 1 or 2 or 3% held back by the budget agency. The way that we did reallocation, or the way that reallocation has been done over time, is that a portion of each institution's operating budget was put back in the pot for all the institutions to earn against. So each institution put 1, 2, 3% back in there, and based on performance, that money was then reallocated or given back out. Significantly more into that fund, and some institutions did not have the opportunity to earn back against that. That became very clear with the most recent round of data that we saw after the declines in enrollments of the Great Recession, and we saw all the completions in that. So it did take a significant hit, and if there was not enough money put in the funding formula, as you saw with the earlier slides, it ended up being a decline in funding for the institutions. I do want to point out the commission always recommended enough funding each year that the institutions would be able to earn something back. Just unfortunately, we did not always receive enough funding from the generals.
Do we have any sense, I mean, have we pre-run this at all with the legislative leaders? And do they hold on to the reallocation concept, or do we think it's open for discussion?
You had color commentary if you don't mind, Josh, but I think it's very open to discussion. In fact, I think even the signaling of Senate Bill Act 366 and others should say that to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open for discussion item. I think that at least for now, though, the not having reallocation in the formula makes sense.
And to that, we've been trying to spend a lot of time. You don't always have firm commitments, and I get that, but with frankly, anyone who will listen, the House, Senate, Governor's Office, Budget Agency, and so forth, on all of these topics.
Yeah. So going into the legacy model here, this is a complicated chart, so hopefully you have a paper version of this closer to see. It's even difficult for me to see here off my laptop. But it has the different metrics that we've used over time for the outcome-based funding formula, which are overall degree completion, at-risk degree completion defined as a student who's received the Pell Grant, STEM degree completion metric, the student persistence metric, and then the on-time graduation rate bonus there at the bottom, which applies to 2 institutions specifically. Sorry, I'm trying to zoom in because I can't see it very well on that. So it does mean under the legacy formula, it is adjusted to 1% of the spend, as was shown earlier in the 3 different prongs: the base allocation increase, the legacy formula, and perspective model. Depending on the decisions made by the General Assembly on how much is funded, the per unit values may change. So that other column, I'll walk through that in a second, but the percentage or the weights will stay the same. So as you can see, the total units are the difference over the 2-year periods, number of increased units. So how many more, just to take the overall completion metric, how many more 18 to 29 credit hour certificates were created over that time. So as you can see on the total units for each of these sections, there's been some progress in most of those items. It is then multiplied by the per unit value and then weighted on the second item. Again, this is 1% of the funding, so roughly around $6 million will be allocated under this as long as the funding that we recommend moves forward. Any questions on?
What does it mean, adjusted to 1% spend?
So the amount of money available is the 6 million, the 1% of the operating funding based on fiscal year 22, I'm sorry. So we take how much operating funding there is and multiply by 1%, and then we use we plug that into the formula. So
and that compares to the past, we've used 6 or 7%.
Yeah, we recommended anywhere between 4 and 8% my time at the commission.
So this is a dramatic reduction in this part.
In just this part in the legacy, but when we look at the prospective funding model, it is a similar thing because there are goals and outcomes related to the prospective funding model as well. So although this portion of the legacy is smaller, I would say we have just as much, if not more than in prior years, based on performance of our institutions.
Yeah, as we get ready to go to the next slide too, which there's well, we didn't include it, it looks like. I check here. I will give that to you. There's an interesting slide I'll send to you. It's too hard to see on mine. It shows back through biennial. Oh, it's in your deck. Okay, very good. It's in your deck. It's not on the screen here. Okay. There's a lot of detail there, but it represents various changes that have taken place around performance funding over the last roughly, what is that, almost 20 years now. And I found it edifying when, and I don't know, Sean, it was you, Josh, someone else on the team pointed that out. I just thought it was interesting to me because it showed the adaptability of adjusting along the way, but sticking with wholeheartedly the idea of outcomes-based and performance funding. With that too, I think this slide that still is in front of you that Josh was just really covering in detail, the construct and the strategy of that, each one of those 5 key buckets, really based around persistence and completion, are also embedded very significantly for every one of the institutions in the prospective funding model. Again, one of the major shifts being not reallocation, but new funding, which also creates a real upside delta, if you will. But those are some things. That's why I wanted you to see the slide that has the blue on it that I don't have on the screen. Okay. Any questions right now? This stuff, I know this is a lot. The outcomes-based funding prospective model we're talking about. Again, we've talked to this slide one more time, not reallocation, but new funding source. Part of what we're seeking in the prospective funding model is to really recognize mission differentiation. And if we think about the 3 primary categories that our state legislature that have been codified, really emphasized, it is the 3 buckets of research institutions, specifically being the R1s, non-research, but I tend to think of as the comprehensive. So this institution where we are today, Indiana State and Ball State, and then the 2-year institutions being Tech and Vincennes, but recognizing the mission differentiation with that, utilizing, frankly, more recent data. Josh, do you want to speak to sort of the lag that occurs there? Because I have to tell you, from my own days in business, the lag nature of the reward that comes with outcomes-based, I've always found it challenging. I'd say always in the 8 or 10 years I've been associated with higher education and trying to find something where it is more recent data that then against which institution leaders and their teams can act. And Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, so the lag that we're talking about, if you remember, we looked at 2-3-year rolling averages, and I'll just pull some years out of this. So we would look at performance from, say, fiscal 12, 13, 14 versus fiscal 15, 16, and 17. So you're going backwards 6 years plus when you add in the biennium itself. You're looking at roughly 8 years of lag on that. And one of often what we heard is university administrations often only last 8 years at that point in time. So they've had a little chance to impact the overall funding, as well as it takes a while to shift on that. So there is a significant lag under the legacy model when we were looking at those, whereas the prospective model will be it'll be current looking forward.
And, it's one of those things I truly didn't anticipate it, but we talked about this a bit with the presidents on Monday, the gathering that President Rashawn and I were referencing earlier. As I looked around the room, I know all these folks, not just because of what I do for a living right now, I'm looking for all of you, but I've known these folks. And, it occurred to me that sort of the average length of time for those folks, if we look at the way the lag works, really barely covers the 2 sets of data against which we're comparing. And, I do think that presents strategic challenges for a leader of an institution. So more than you probably cared for about, trying to utilize more recent data against which people can think, in the nearer term, not short term, but the nearer term and a mid and the long. Do you want to add anything, Josh?
Looks like you wanted to add something, Chris. I'll let you
No,
know.
I'm
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It wasn't about just the lag. I wanted to add something else, so. if you wanna-
Yeah, no, I just had a question, and that is, we identified what those specific outcomes are, each one of those, and I don't know if have we seen those yet, or?
We've got the categories, but for each institution, that is something we wanted to make sure we had the framework that was acceptable to all of you to then begin the discussions, and Josh reeling in again here if I'm misstating anything, to then meet with the institutions on each one of those. We've got a grid we'll show you here in a second of what that could look like, but then saying to someone, I'm making this number up, this was 50%, how do we get to 60% or something like that?
So I'm assuming that's yet to be presented and approved by the commission,
Correct. So I think when we look at what came out of
because it's real money.
Oh, definitely. What came out of the legislative working group and ultimately out of 366 was the need for this change and this update to the model to happen and looking forward. But what we also heard is how much they want us to work with them as well in this process. So it'll be a collaborative effort to set with the institutions, obviously the commission leading on this, and then keeping the General Assembly apprised. I think you recognized earlier that people or organizations this year are asking for more money than ever. I think as it was put to Chris and I in one meeting is they typically come with one hand out and everybody's coming with two hands out this year. So we know that we need to make sure that we are involving them in the process and that we have an item, like you mentioned, that we can work hand in glove with the institutions to advocate for in that planning session.
And I think what's been clear is there's been no one who said, hey, let's back away from metrics within completion. That is where we can move the needle, but recognizing the other challenges we pointed out, whether that is the college going rate, whether it's the adults, whether it's the retention of our graduates here in the state. And Josh, you started to mention, and I think maybe I've got a slide in here that's, yep, maybe in your deck, but not on screen. Yeah, so my next slide, you already referenced a little bit, that I think you all have in your printed deck, is around the legislative working group and HCM strategy, which the commission, if you will, to help look into this. And the three primary things that did come out of that will reflect on that other screen: mission differentiation, the data, and then allowing just the institutions to measure against themselves. Josh, do you want to help lead off on this one?
Yeah, so as mentioned, the third prong of the operating formula this year is the prospective outcomes-based funding. And as outlined in this, it would be up to 3% of the funding for fiscal year 24 and 4% of the funding for fiscal year 25, amounting to $37.7 million in the first year of the biennium and $50.2 million in the second year of the biennium. Those amounts earned up to 52.2 if all institutions were to hit all metrics. The prospective model will be added to the base budget for the following year. We have a graphic that will show that here in a second. This does exclude, as it always has in the model, the IU schools of medicine, dentistry, the IU Fort Wayne programs, the College of Veterinary, and the Purdue Land Grant MOE. Chris, if you can move forward a slide on this one, unless you wanted to add something there.
No, please.
So how this will work, and I will do my best to do a set of impression. Probably need a booster seat if I want to do that. But so with this, it has a base appropriation of we're starting with 100%. So if we're looking at fiscal year 23, that's the base appropriation. The prospective appropriation in this would be, let's say it's a value of 10. We'll use that for what they could prospectively earn. In this hypothetical, the institutions earn 2 of the 10 in the first year of the biennium and 5 of the 10 in the second year of the biennium. What that would then allow for is the total paid the first year of the biennium, because we will award as they meet the goals of the prospective formula, a total of 102 and then 105 the second year. Any items not earned or any amount not earned in the prospective funding formula would then move forward to the next biennium. So just simple math that they made here, if it's 10 and they earn 7 of the 10, 3 moves forward to the next biennium is what you're seeing there. The 7 they do earn will be then added to the base formula for the next budget cycle. So looking at fiscal year 26, the base then increases by the 7 points there. And then just following that on, the next cycle, we have the 3 carried forward from the previous biennium. If we receive 10 in funding again, leaving 13 available. And in this, again, hypothetical, they earn 12 with 3 in the first biennium, making it 110, and then 116 in the second, carrying 1 forward, and so on and so forth. That can be a little bit complicated, and I don't know if I explained it the best. I'm happy to answer any questions around how that would move forward.
So does this provide then that this prospective outcomes would phase out after that 5-year period, or through the 29, or would there be a new model?
No, so the amounts the amounts will still be in the base itself, and then each biennium we will be setting goals for the prospective model. So it will be continuously evolving as we look at what the needs of the state and the institutions are. So we don't anticipate it phasing out after that point in time, unless naturally, like the old model, it needs that, but it would continue forward after that. It's just what we fit on the slide here.
I think, Josh, I understand the model. I get the model.
Yeah.
What is going through my head is I don't know what the outcomes are that we're asking by university and whether those have even been discussed with the commission.
Yeah. We have not set those with the commission yet. No, those have not been good.
Well, but I was going to say the 3 areas, Chris, in addition to completion that we had talked about at BBC, and I'm not sure how long back, but have been around the college going rate. So looking at that, the adults and the college grad retention. So I'll give an example of how that could look. Indiana University with their flagship institution and their regional campuses might, as an example, and please, Trevor, or somebody else, don't take this for any more than an example here, might at the flagship institution have let's say, an aggressive goal around the retention of those college graduates, right? Because of some of the challenges we see in that, where at their regional campuses, a lever where there could be additional emphasis placed is with those 1.9 million future working age adults who are employed locally in the region, in the community. Those are the 3 key area levers in addition to the completion metrics that we said, and those are so applicable across all the institutions. But those 3 areas where then within the institution, we can become more specific on what we need them doing to help increase in those 3 different areas.
So on the completion, that would fall under the kind of 1%.
So in the completion, in the prospective model, gosh, we had a slide like this, Josh. It would be what we were proposing, 50% of the whole model. Again, make sure I'm correct here, Josh.
Yeah.
And those other 3 disaggregated across the other 50%. So everybody's got 50% in that prospective model of a 3% funding bucket and a 4% funding bucket. Everyone's got focus on whatever fits for them in the completion area, and then separately the other half of that focusing on going rate adults and grad retention to the degree we need that institution pulling that lever or that lever.
Yeah, I guess just for me, and I apologize because I did miss some commission meetings earlier this year. If there's more information on that would help me understand exactly by institution what we're talking about, that would be helpful to me.
We'll make sure everyone gets that.
Okay.
And Josh, please make sure I didn't misstate anything there. Or tell me if I did. Better said, tell me if I did.
I think the key is it's got to be defined in a collaborative fashion with the institutions recognizing what their needs are, their specific needs are, obviously concurring with us, but also ensuring that we've got the legislative group involved, because adding this additional money, they're going to want to have really a hand in the action in creating this. I think that's going to be one of the key selling points that we'll have to realize.
Yeah, I guess my question is just whether the commission approves that or not. But in any case, making sure we all understand what that is by institution, I think would be really important.
I think it's critically important, Chris. I think that what we need is the understanding of the overall structure, prospective, that, we have this focus on these key areas, recognizing the mission differentiation, and then coming back to you with, hey, this is exactly, the piece of that pie for this institution, that institution. If this one's going to be really driving on this, and we want to be supportive of that, provide incentive to that.
Are we, I must say, I mean, this is very complicated. I mean, you and I have talked about this. I feel like I need a little one-on-one tutorial before I can vote on something like this. I mean, I just, and with performance funding in the past, I've always gotten my one-on-one tutorial because it's hard to remember every 2 years exactly what happened. And of course, this is brand new, so I don't know if we're going to be asked to approve this today. I mean, I would feel much more comfortable if we had the opportunity to really understand it before we vote on it.
I'm not sure that's possible.
Yeah, with it's scheduled to be voted on today, and I know that for the December 7th meeting, we have to move something forward at this point in time. Maybe we can step back, or go ahead real quick, and just kind of step back in the way that we're thinking about the operating funding completely. So just to try to check off all the different things. So there are the 3 items within this that we've talked about. The one, the base increase, I think that's pretty clear on what we're doing with that one. Well, I know. The second portion of it is the legacy formula. We've all dealt with that for quite a while. Sorry, some new members haven't dealt with it as long as the rest of us, but that would be funded under the 1% amount that we talked about on that.
And remind everybody what the legacy is. So
yeah, the legacy formula is the old. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Is the old outcomes-based funding model with the 2-3 year rolling averages around the 5 metrics that we had outlined over the last 8 years. Oops. Right there. Oops, sorry. Yeah. When we're looking at the third prong of the formula, and mind you, the legacy formula will go away in future biennium. It'll be just any base increase and the prospective model. The prospective model will be looking at whether or not the institutions meet the goals set by the commission in partnership with the institutions with input from the legislature as well. And they will be awarded during the biennium as they meet those goals. As Chris had mentioned, 50%, when we previously talked about this at prior commission meetings, were around system-wide goals, and 50% were around the institutional-based goals as well. They will then be able to have that added to their base going forward. So kind of, if we want to think about it in terms of the old model, the legacy model, it's like they're earning the funding in current time and adding it back into the budget at that point. I don't know if that helps Al or not, and we can sit down with you more to talk about this.
Well, I mean, at a conceptual, I just don't know how much specifics we're voting on. At a conceptual level, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
But when you get into those boxes there, I get
Understandable.
I get very, very confused. The other thing that so you got a 3% and a 4%, is that right?
Correct.
And so they've got a shot at earning 3%. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so they can earn, so let's say the institution meets all their goals in the first year of the biennium.
Right.
They earn that full 3% then, and then they would earn the full 4% the next year of the biennium as well.
So then you say so if their budget's $100 and then they fully earn, then they're going to get $3. Is that right?
Correct.
And then in the second year, if it's the budget, then are you saying the budget goes from 100 to 103?
Yes. Yeah.
That next year?
Yes.
Correct. Well, they got the 3 on top of the 100, so the but then the base becomes 103.
Correct.
And then they have an opportunity to earn $4 on top of that.
Yeah.
And then so then the base goes to 107.
Correct.
For this biennium.
Yeah.
Right, but then then is that 107, the
Sorry, let me step back and modify your writing here. So it's 103 the first year, then 104 the second year. So I apologize, it would not be 107 the second year. It's
I see.
104 at that point. I apologize for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
it's not cumulative.
it's not cumulative that way, but you can earn up to that going forward. So, okay, yeah, I apologize on, I didn't understand, but yeah, it would be up to a 4% increase that second year.
and then when y'all talk about folding it into the base, what does that mean?
It means the next year, that would be part of their base funding, so that would be their base operating.
The next year, the next biennium,
Next biennium, correct.
and would it be 104 or 107?
It would be
Whatever they earn.
whatever they earn, so the 104,
Up to the 104.
yes, up to the 104.
Although the slide says 107.
Yeah, and the way that is done is just that all of it divided out 10 total and with 5 each year being able to be earned. So that that one wasn't broken down by the biennium as that, it's more of a block unit at that point.
So
What happens, if they have maybe 2 bienniums of some positive growth, and then they begin to decline? Does the funding come back out?
It rolls to their base funding does not decline, but they do not meet the prospective model, it would roll to the next biennium. So any money that is not earned during that biennium would move forward to the next.
moves forward
As part of something they can earn in the next
as
prospective
an
funding
incentive.
model. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right, and what happens if the number, we hope this doesn't happen, but if the number of students declines?
If the number of students declines,
Right,
if one of the prospective items was based off student enrollment, they would not be earning funding at that point in time. But it would just be on the items that it would depend on the goals that are set. But if one of the items is student enrollment, which I know that's an issue we talk about rarely, they would not earn at that point.
and the automatic rollover to the next biennium is, in theory, obviously the legislature can do whatever they want.
Yeah. Correct.
So is
So
it correct
essentially
if they,
Sorry, well, I'm just trying, sorry, I'm having to think out loud here. So essentially, you're giving them a chance to get a 3%. Well, they're getting a 1% on the legacy.
Until a certain time, then it cuts off?
Correct.
So what-
As we make the
What date
transition,
is that?
just this biennium,
The next biennium.
So all legacy's gone after that.
except that the 5 pieces that we talked about around completion, that's going to be part of the prospective model too.
So essentially, the 3%. I'm sorry, I'm confused here. We're recommending 1% increase in the base, sorry. We're not the incentive,
Yeah, so in the base funding, we're recommending the first year 2% and then 3% in the second year.
so then the example, they get 102, then they get 3% of the 102, is that the correct? Then the second year, they can get 4% of, well, they get another 3% bonus, so they're at 105.
So let's step back again on this one. So it's based on the prior year. So again, you're gonna break it out to the 3. You have the base increase, the legacy, and the prospective. The first year of the biennium, that base increase is 2% off this last year of the biennium.
Right.
The next year, the 3% is still off that last year of the
I see.
biennium. Yes. So then we go to the legacy model, same with that, same with the prospective performance model. They can never get more because it adds up to 6% total. They can never get more than 6% in the first year of the biennium and 8% of the second year of the biennium. But that is based off of fiscal year, of the last fiscal year 23.
You know, again, I'm not sure I understand it totally, but at a conceptual level, seems fine to me, other than if they don't make it, then it's thrown into next year's pool. I mean, my gut is if they don't make it, they lose.
Yeah, I think this is a way to ensure that we have funding for higher education as well going forward and still have the incentive for the institutions to move forward with the goals of the state that we have for them.
Yeah, and Josh, you're exactly right. Yeah, the intent is to create a pool for all of them to have access to. So if my institution only gets part of that, it goes into that pool to really start setting aside some funding in a pool that could be utilized for higher education, where we haven't done something like that before. Now, again, a long way between now and April 30th on what legislature may think about that.
Is the pool for all institutions or for that particular institution?
The pool, so the pool is for all institutions to earn that percent. So whenever we do the 50, or let me get to the slide here, I apologize. So the under the 3% is that 37.7, so they can earn their 3% against that as well. So,
But if ABC institution doesn't earn all that it could.
Yeah.
So it's saved and then put in a pool. Is that pool then available only to ABC or?
Everybody at that, everybody.
Oh, that makes me feel better.
Right, yeah, everybody. And it reminds me of the comment you were making, Nancy, rather than just reverting back to say the state's general fund or something like that, setting it aside essentially for those state institutions for future incentive purposes. Which I think also is where we run into some bumps, with challenges in our economy at different times. We operate grants, for example, like the OBAN, and that we retain those funds so that if, for example, enrollment goes up, or in this example, we were able to go back to Budget Committee and others and say, look, we'd like to increase the schedule of this because that money has been going back in there, we've been prudent with it. It's allowed us to have funding to do that kind of work. We haven't had that kind of ability with a set aside, if you will. Rather, it would just normally revert back to the state's general fund. We're saying we'd like to keep the eyes on that for higher ed.
And so to recap real quick before we go to the next slide, because I think the next slide hopefully will help, hopefully it doesn't confuse anymore. So we have the base increase that's been recommended, that we're recommending of 2% and 3% on the last year of the biennium, the 1% for the legacy performance funding model, and then the 3% and the 4% for the prospective performance model. The next slide outlines how it would work for specific universities or institutions. So let's say that the base appropriation for University 1 here is 450. The proportion, and this is the perspective model, the bucket there of the model is 45%. So 3 institutions add up to 1,000. We need to go back. Yep, here. So they have 45% that they can earn out of the bucket because that's their proportion of the prospective funding model. They have a potential earning amount again of 45, and then this hypothetical, they've earned 15 of that, and they did not earn 30. So they move forward and they have a base new appropriation in next biennium of 465. And then if you go down to University 2, they were 350, again, 35% of the prospective funding formula model. Their potential earnings are 35. If they earned 15 out of that, they didn't earn 20, and they're now at 365. University 3, again, 200, 20% of the total of the prospective funding model. If they have potential earnings of 20, they've earned all 20, they go forward. The reason we point this out is that institutions that earn more of their prospective funding will see their ability to earn grow in the next biennium. So as we move forward, they've increased their proportion of it because of their performance. So whereas University 3 has improved, their new proportion has increased as well. And that's when, as Al, we were talking about, the money moves forward into the bucket for everybody to earn, and it's not all there.
Have we seen this before, or is this the first time?
I believe that besides BPC, I know it was in there, and then I do believe a version of this was another commission meeting. September, October, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about it at the committee meeting. We didn't have these specific charts here. These are some new charts we haven't seen before, but conceptually, we did talk about precisely what we're doing. Conceptually, yeah. Yeah, this is obviously a little more granular and provides a little bit more from the illustrative perspective.
Yeah. And then, Chris, maybe the next slide will also help because it breaks it down to the actual numbers that we're looking at here with the proposal. So I'm just going to go column by column that we see. So fiscal year 23 appropriation is the first one, and that's what we are going about, the percents that are based against. As I mentioned, there were certain things like the IU School of Medicine that are removed out of appropriation, Fort Wayne for IU. So you can see in the next column what's excluded from the outcomes-based funding. So then what you have then is your outcomes-based funding base amount. So this is how much is available based on the 23 appropriation. So you can see by each institution here and then by the Purdue and IU systems. In the next column, it has what 1% would represent for them under the legacy model. Under the second item, it shows the 2% base adjustment, and then mind you, this is fiscal year 24, and then how much they can earn in fiscal year, or in the prospective model, 3% in fiscal year 24. So the total new funding that can be earned during that time is outlined there. Then if you go into the fiscal year 25, again, 1% for the legacy model. The now 3% base adjustment, and then the 4% prospective model going forward.
This is so small, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
How does the 1% legacy, $2,045,000, and you're taking 1% of 198 million, 1,980,000, whatever thousand. I mean, 1%, anyway.
It's 1% of the 1.255 billion. You look at the OBF base. Yeah, the OBF base, and then 1% of that is the 12,559,000.
Yeah, and that amount, and if an institution corrects me if I'm wrong, I apologize. I'm filling in percent here, so I'm trying to get this. That's how much they earn back under the legacy model. So under the performance.
Yeah, well, it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, 1% of 198 base.
I know, yeah, because it's based on the performance again, so that model is, so they're not getting, I apologize, they're not getting exactly 1% back, they're getting back what they've earned in the model. So if you remember under the old outcomes-based funding model, you didn't automatically get back the same percent. This is what they've earned back based on their performance over the last biennium.
It's easier to look at the totals.
Yeah.
If you want to look at the totals rather than by institution.
Yeah.
You can get the concept better.
Yeah.
Because in this run, Josh, there's been assumptions made on each of those institutions to come up with that quote scenario.
Yeah, so
Can I ask a question, just not to belabor this, I'm sorry, but is there, maybe this is impossible, but if you were to use the same assumptions that you use to plug into this model, and look at the totals, and you did the same thing using the same assumptions, plugged it in, if it was only the old model, what would the financial difference be outcome or at the macro level? Does that make sense? What I'm
Yeah,
asking?
that's a very good question.
yeah, there would be no increase for on the whole. So
It's
because of the
it's a
performance,
wash.
yeah, because the performance was, because enrollment declines have gone down and items like that, when we look at there's no increase in performance in a lot of these areas. And Chris, maybe you can help me on this one.
Well, I think your key to this is also this is new funding and not reallocation from the pool. But if you assumed running it in the old model, no reallocation, it was all new money. You ran the old system, all new money, based on the recommendations and assumptions, you would come up with a chart like this, would say this would cost X. And if you did it now,
same assumptions, same, no reallocation, you ran it under this, what would because I can't imagine the legislature, aren't gonna ask that question of, okay, what's the delta for Indiana?
Yeah,
And what we'll spend intentionally.
so if we ran it under just all new money, it would still be the total amount would still be the same. The institutional amounts would differ under that. So if we had if this was,
Assuming you use the same percentages each biennium overall.
Correct.
For your incentive, okay.
yeah,
So
so the change would be under what each institution earns, not the total dollars at that point. What I was going with the negative back, I'm gonna step back from that, I'm not gonna jump that far.
And probably to state the obvious, Dan, what that then would, or doesn't account for, what this does is what Senate Act 366 contemplated, and what HCM, the commission, the study, right? I know it's probably stating the obvious, but just kind of, grab it, right?
Yeah, why we're doing.
Yeah.
And maybe just one last question for me, and of our institution partners, fully aware of this and supportive.
Yeah, Seth has been meeting with the institutional partners on this for, I feel like it's been a year that he's been meeting with them individually. I don't know if any of them want to jump in on how they, on this or not, but we've included them in the process.
Yeah, very good. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to provide some feedback. We have been meeting with Seth on the conceptual basis of this. But Ivy Tech has serious concerns about the recommendations today. The first that we saw of the percent recommendations was at the BPC meeting, and it has a significant effect on Ivy Tech to change from the legacy model to the prospective funding at the percentages that are being recommended today. Back in June, Seth showed a PowerPoint slide during a commission meeting that showed what the legacy model would be without any changes, assuming that the General Assembly gave the same percentage amounts in higher education funding. Ivy Tech would have gained about $15 to $17 million based on the performance that we have done under the legacy model, specifically because the certificates that we have issued over the last 6 years have significantly increased. Part of the reason being is the Workforce Ready Grant. So we have been doing what we have been asked to do by the General Assembly and by the Commission. Under this model with the 1% in legacy, it is $2.9 million. So that is a significant hit to Ivy Tech at a time when we were anticipating growth in the performance funding. We also have concerns about not understanding what the actual metrics would be under the prospective funding. We don't have enough information to say that we could support. We are open to discussions, but we do have concerns for that reason. And I have shared those with Seth and Commissioner Lowry. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, before it was 6 or 7% for legacy, and now it's 1%. So
yes,
but that's only whatever this new approach is on top of your 2 to 3 million.
right, but not knowing what those metrics
But
are.
nobody knows what it is, right?
In addition to that, even if we use 2 years of data, we're in the 2 years that we would be evaluating right now for the biennium. And so the data is already baked. We can't make any changes behaviorally of the institution to modify what we are doing for whatever metrics come forward. We need a little bit of lead time so that if you want us to change behaviors, we can do that, but we need a little bit of lead time because our data is already baked. Even if we move to 2 years, we're already in academic year 22-23. If we don't know what those metrics are until May 1st, when the General Assembly is adjourned, sine die, that's 2 months before our next academic year. Even if we can make changes during that next academic year, then we're going into the second year of the biennium. So it just makes it a little bit difficult for us to make changes for the prospective funding. Again, conceptually, we've been having those discussions and we've shared those concerns Our preference would be to continue with a legacy model for 2 years and work out those details for prospective going forward, making sure that we all understand what those metrics are. But happy to work with the commission and members on that.
Can I ask a question of clarification too? On the prospective side, I want to make sure I understand that some of the metrics are intended to be built around contributions to our overall mission related to college going rate and so forth. That's
correct.
Okay, so, yes, so when I think of my role as a faculty member and knowing the ways that institutions as individual entities could try to attack some of those things, some ways that we could do that in institutions cost more than the money we're going to come back. And so I think I'm feeling like the level of detail there is really important because we don't want to, any institution doesn't want to commit to going down a path to earning an incentive that for whatever reason doesn't align with their institutional incentives and their workforce and skill set and so forth. So I appreciate the chance to kind of understand that better. And I feel like there's something to monitor there as we go forward to make sure that the incentives align all around. Because it's not obvious to me right now that they do.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important about the monitoring of that and that we are getting those results. And frankly, I think what we're seeing is some of the challenges we're facing today, we've not addressed. The declining going rate, where we are with retention, where we're stuck with, from an adult population. I think it particularly resonates having heard the presentation from Jason Clote this morning. So I think your point about the monitoring and are we getting what we need out of it? We have to do that, and that 2-3 year segments of lagging indicators don't provide the adaptability that we've got to have in Indiana, and that we're going to have to probably be more sort of fleet of foot as we look at that data.
I agree with you, but I'm almost, as a faculty rep, I'm thinking from the individual institution's perspective, not my institution, but as a representative of an institution, I feel like the institutions will appreciate the system going forward and understand that that's through, but it's unclear how an individual institution can be held accountable or should be held accountable for contributing to what is our collective mission. Like I'm sensing that's sort of the uncertainty of that is what I'm hearing you talk about. Is that fair?
I think that's part of it, but just understanding what outcomes we're going to be held accountable for. It's difficult to say that we can support the 3%, 4% in that when we're unsure what those metrics are. We appreciate the desire and that the commission wants to put more money in higher education. Obviously, we support that. We understand the concerns of our partner institutions on reallocation. Ivy Tech has basically been agnostic on reallocation. We use reallocation internally, so we understand the reason for that. In addition to that, I was at the commission, our CFO and our chief of staff were both part of the reallocation aspect when we were at the commission. So we have always felt like it's difficult for us to speak against reallocation when we have been a part of that. But we understand everyone's concerns about those. And, when we need to make a significant investment in higher education, we understand the need to do away with reallocation. So we understand that, but our concern is just not understanding what those metrics would be for that higher funding and the significant impact it would be to move legacy when Ivy Tech has done well over the last 6 years, doing exactly what the state has asked us to do, and we're now seeing those benefits.
Can I ask a question? When I'm looking at this chart up here, is IT, CCI, Ivy Tech?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. So when I look at 2024 on the spreadsheet, it looks like the 1% legacy is 2.91 million. Then the 2% base was 4.7. So that's what, a little over 7 right there. And then the 3% that's on the table with perspective is based on meeting these metrics. That would be an additional 7. Am I reading this correctly? Yes. Okay, awesome. So I'm sorry, what was the number you received the last time?
If the legacy based on the commission's analysis, Ivy Tech would be getting $15 to $17 million more annually for that.
And Mike, you're right, that what this number shows is roughly 14, almost 15 million.
Right.
And if you see the total new funding, it could be $19 million, but we don't know what those metrics are, so there's no guarantee, whereas the legacy model is what we have been doing. It's the data that has been there and what we have been working towards over the last 6 years.
I think Ed brought up an interesting point I'd just like to explore a little bit further, and that's, when we think about the system-wide desire, let's say, to influence the rate of who goes to college, to raise that. How much can an individual university do to control that? Is that more of a K through 12? And then would that potentially cost them more than that part of the incentive would earn them? Am I hearing that? Was that part of your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And depending upon how an institution went about trying to influence that, it certainly could cost them an awful lot of money in outreach and camps and personnel and everything else. And so, yeah, that's part of the question is how are those things calibrated to make sure we incentivize exactly the right thing that moves the needle on some of these other metrics?
Yeah, and I don't, I wouldn't say we're ever going to incentivize exactly the right way. Even as Jason was talking about the upcoming study by Rand, looking at certifications as their certificates and understanding what is of economic value and not, do they end up, for example, paying wages that are median, livable, and so forth is one example. But to come close, and I think is what I would say is to get as close as possible to addressing those challenges. I think maybe some other institutions will mention some things, but leaning into some of the things that we've been talking about, like 21st century scholars, and not only getting the auto enrollment of those students, but also recruiting them to come. Jason talked about something we're not fully ready to talk with you about yet, but the transcript pool, I can't remember the exact term, Josh, but the model that he was talking about that ought to be helpful to those institutions that may be struggling with enrollment.
Well, I'll just say one other thing is that I think from an individual institution's perspective, the toolbox that you have to have the students currently enrolled and support them in appropriate ways to make sure that they graduate, that toolbox has a lot more certainty to it than the tools that I might have at my disposal to keep them in the state once they graduate, or the tools I have from K through 12 into my institution. And I think that uncertainty is a significant stressor around this. That is just something that is it feels, my intuition is that it feels very difficult to figure out the calibration of that. And so that's why again, from the institutional perspective, there's a lot of ways you could do that are all, it's not obvious to me that there's a great answer to that for any individual institution because of the system-wide nature of it.
I'll let Greg go and then I'll add comment or two, if that's okay.
Please.
All right.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
In the meantime, point of order, Mr. Chair, I know we are running up into the lunch hour, so I would suggest at some point we figure out a time to recess.
Thanks for hanging in there. Here from
Greg, thanks. Let's, what time is it right now? Yeah, let's finish at noon. So we'll hear from the institutions and gosh, there's something to say too, but let's go through let's let everyone speak here.
Well, first and foremost, thanks for allowing us to get up and speak. I want to give a special thanks to Commissioner Lowry. You truly working so hard and listening to people, and this is a Herculean effort here. Not only for a new commissioner, but some expectations for a change in outcomes-based funding, and it's never going to be easy. We're never, ever, ever going to get to a point where everybody's going to agree. But I'm here to tell you that we at Indiana State are 100% in support of this recommendation. It provides much greater clarity. The mission differentiation piece
is something that is always going to be a work in progress, but it really does, I think, better leverage the individual strengths of each institution and the different populations we serve. And I truly believe that while we may not have specifically identified those institutionally based outcomes right now, we go into this with good faith that we're going to get there with our commissioner and our legislator partners. Secondly, it's forward thinking, it's forward looking. The legacy model is looking as far back as a decade. When you're taking a look at a freshman entering a university, well, who could have ever imagined 10 years ago that we would still be struggling with a pandemic or rising global threats and the challenges facing our Indiana workforce today? We couldn't have really predicted that 10 years ago. So forward thinking and forward looking allows us to continue to adjust and pivot when necessary. We're always going to be quibbling, if you will, over 0.5% here or that. The key is for us to be able, with all of you, to explain this to our citizen legislators. And I think we're moving in a really strong direction here, and really, really grateful for the increased investment, really, really grateful for the commitment and capital. If we want to build a 21st century workforce, we must have 21st century learning facilities that impacts local communities and the local trades and the construction companies in the region. It impacts certainly our state. Indiana State University is in the midst of a $100 million comprehensive fundraising campaign, and our donors are crystal clear. If the state will invest in facilities and on-campus projects, donors want to invest in scholarship opportunities, invest in faculty, invest in people. And then finally, with regard to capital, I want to been very, very mindful this past summer of the leadership of United States Senator Todd Young, who in a bipartisan way co-authored a bill called the CHIPS bill. Why? Because the United States of America is lagging behind around a lot of geopolitical threats here, as other countries want to take us down on things relating to semiconductor industry and other 21st century industries, where the United States, as the world leader of democracy, must be the leader in these areas. And your investments in things like our College of Technology facility will allow us to increase the workforce in those high demand areas. So again, we're very, very supportive and grateful.
There's always a risk in following an eloquent speaker like Greg, but I will do my best to also echo the comments that Greg made. As a different perspective as the first perspective you heard today, we're so very, very thankful to the commission for taking a look at a formula in which Ball State could never win the dollars. We have been donors to the legacy formula, and taking this forward-looking approach has been really important to us as we try to really meet what it is our state needs, as we look at, you know, the discussion we had earlier today and how it is we think about keeping college graduates in Indiana. We can't do everything, but there are certainly things that we can do with intention, with purpose throughout that educational process. And all of that takes operating funds. All of that takes intentionality from the day someone enters our campus and decides they might want to study something, helping them along with regions across the state who need workforce in specific areas, getting our alums as mentors engaged in helping people to figure out what it is that they want to do and where it is they may want to go, and helping them to think intentionally during that time about how to connect themselves with those regions in our state is so incredibly important. And that's operating funding. It's not a side program one place or another. It's aligning our faculty with our career services staff, with every single person who may touch a student, so that we can remove those impediments. And we certainly just can't be doing those sorts of things anticipating declines in funding in the same way that we really seek to do so. So we're going to dig in more than ever. I think we're going to see more and more about what it is we hope to do to help not force our students or clip wings to stay anywhere or or track students a certain way, but they've got a flight path and it's 4 years long. And we have every opportunity to encourage them to stay in the state and to make our economy a strong one. And these steps that you're taking today are really, really important to allowing us to do that. I think when we talk about capital, we're also so thankful for what you're doing and considering capital projects this time, because we can do anything on our smartphone. But if we don't use those capital facilities with intention throughout the educational process, we just don't have a hope at keeping all of those bright young minds in the places where we hope we do. So we're committed to this hard work, and we're so thankful that this is really a courageous step, and happy to be helpful in any way that we can, but it's important to us, and we're thankful.
And I have the really difficult task of following the last speaker between you and lunch. So Saxon Howard with Indiana University. Just want to echo Greg and Becca's comments. Very grateful to Commissioner Lowry and to Seth and Josh and the whole team for being receptive about making changes to the formula. Indiana University has been supportive of this change today, and we see it also as a future-focused way for the university to excel, to hit our president's 3 pillars of putting students first, having excellent research, and being service to the state as the university's flagship university. Obviously, all of you are aware that IU has a statewide impact. We have 2 flagship campuses in Bloomington and Indianapolis, and the regional campuses across the state. The legacy model of the formula has been good to our regional campuses and to IUPUI, but the rate of growth that we're able to win back money in the formula, it would become a point where we would not be doing as well. So this change is very much being supported by our university leadership, our board, and so we're grateful to you as the commission as we move forward in the process to be supportive of the recommendation that you're going to support today. So I'm happy to take any questions, but just wanted to echo comments of Indiana University's support.
Zach. Josh.
Yeah, I just want to remind, and this is going back, so if you remember in June, Seth gave a presentation on what this would have looked like if we would have used the old model, and the outcomes that were from this were significant losses for many institutions, minor gains for a few of the institutions, and then 2 institutions with outsized portions of that being increased. It was ultimately a result that did not reflect the actual performances of all the institutions, only some of them. I've been, for the 9 years I've been here, a very strong proponent of our legacy model of outcomes-based funding. It's just with where we're at in the evolution of the formula, it's not something going forward that could continue in that way without seriously harming some of our institutions.
Thanks, Josh. Commissioner, do you have anything to say before we wrap? Lunch. Okay, lunch, except for commission members, I apologize, but we have to get our picture taken. So we need to follow Doug here and get a picture taken before we eat lunch. And then we'll come back and finish up this the voting we have to do on these items. Discussion of voting sounds good. All right. So I don't know where we're going right now. Aaron, you gonna help us?
So we're gonna do a joint lunch. We're not gonna have separate lunches today, so everybody will be upstairs where we had breakfast set up. So if members want to stay here, we're gonna do your picture, I think in the library, but I'm not certain. If everyone else wants to head upstairs, we have the hot bar and the cold bar set up. Feel free to take a